Waste of time.
So let's go ahead and
Because if
call the council meeting to order.
And
Eric's got to get his last few words
Sorry.
out there. That's okay, that's good. Yeah, it's a good story.
Good story.
A good STEM story.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it was.
So before we go, I think this is being recorded, so just for purposes of introductions, why don't we go around the table and introduce ourselves so people, whatever we record, knows who's here, and then we'll do the introduction of the people around the table here, around outside of the table. So Jim Pyro, Chair.
Mark Lewis, Director of STEM.
Lucy Graham, Black Canyon.
Eric Meslow, Timbercon.
Thompson Morrison, Fuse Insight.
Jessica Gomez, North Valley Micro Devices.
Dwayne Johnson, Globe Free Ventures.
Cheryl Myers, Higher Education Coordinating Commission.
Agnes Palasa, Governor's Office, Workforce Policy.
Joe Oshiro, Oregon University System.
Duncan Rice, Oregon Business Council, and member of the HEC.
John Yoder, South Metro STEM Learning Community Director.
On the community, OUS.
Jeff Polk, University of Oregon.
Luis Morez, CCWD. Seth Allen, staff for Oregon Education Investment Board.
Craig Hudson from Garmin and South Metro Salem STEM Hub.
Carla Wade, Oregon Department of Education, Digital Learning, Educational Technology, and D-Star and STEM.
You don't get that.
I think that's good. Best title.
Make a great acronym.
Too many concepts.
Melissa Dubois, Director of South Metro Salem STEM Hub.
Ruth McDonald from Lincoln County School District, and also the Partnership Coordinator for Oregon Coast Regional STEM Hub.
Great attendance. So, well, thank you all for coming. We will have time later in the session for public comment. This is kind of a roll-up-your-sleeves session. We've spent a lot of time learning about what's going on, and I think we've all been kind of chomping at the bit to get started and working on recommendations and moving forward. And Mark's counseled us to be patient. You know, education for us is good, and grounding in what's going on, and there's a lot of good things going on. I will tell you the summit that we had last month was outstanding. Thanks to Mark for his leadership in that. And I thought we had a lot of great ideas, and you can see by the comments in your material that there's a lot of good ideas out there. There's no wealth of good ideas, so the question is how do we sort that out? Maybe Mark can also report on the subsequent meeting that happened after that with the STEM hubs to give us a sense, because a lot of us did not participate in that. But again, I understand it was a good collaboration, a lot of learnings between the STEM hubs on what's working and what's not working. So the agenda today is pretty busy. Again, as a roll up your sleeves, starting working on recommendations. We are pointing towards the July 24th report out to the OEIB in terms of our recommendations and thoughts as they start putting together a legislative package together and how we fit in that overall legislative package. So we're kind of time is of the essence, and we're probably going to have to do some kind of offline work on this as we go forward. But we really need your insights and thoughts. I think you've been absorbing a lot of good ideas, but we need to be focused at this point. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to lead us into the conversation. So maybe just give us an update on the STEM Hub meeting, and then we'll get it right onto the agenda.
Happy to. First and foremost, thank you all for coming today, and for those who are specific folks who have been invited to deliberate with us around making policy investment and other recommendations through the system. It is an important day for us because we're pivoting from listening to a lot of input, trying to capture, from different aspects of the broader educational ecosystem related to STEM, and now pivoting to specific actions that set us up for future actions as well. So our goal today will be to really try to whittle things down to 2 to 4 primary major recommendations that would then get rolled into the broader OEIB strategy and recommendations into the governor's budget. There's still a lot of work to do that kind of integration, so the next couple of months I will be deeply engaged in that process along with my colleagues at the OEIB. The STEM Hub meeting after the Leadership Summit in Eugene was, as you know, the STEM Hubs is a critical strategy for us as a state. It's absolutely vital for a number of reasons. We need an implementation network here in the state. We need to be finding local solutions to local issues. We have such great diversity across the state. that we need to draw upon those local assets and address the local issues, whether those are economic, talent development, education, etc. Those play hand in hand together, and we need to be mindful of that. And the STEM hubs will play a critical role in working with other constituencies in those regions to define the needs and to move things forward. So the conversation on the day after the STEM Summit was really geared around what are the philosophical underpinnings, what are the expectations of these hubs, trying to help them understand that this is not just partnerships as usual. It is not just a partnership between a community college and a school district. It's not just a partnership between out-of-school time providers, free choice learning environments and school districts, that this is looking at that broader context and urging that they have the right people at the table, defining the needs, working on a common vision, creating strategies and creating the outcomes and metrics that are necessary to monitor whether or not they're being successful. There's still a lot more work to be done in that regard, and there's a role certainly from a sort of a central perspective to support the hubs, but there's a lot of work out at the regions themselves as well, because people are in different places, quite honestly. Some people have been working at that for 2 or 3 years now, and others are fairly fresh, and some have been working at it for 10 or 15 years, and really now using this idea of collective impact and hub to help classify and extend their thinking that has been going on for some time now. So I'm very, very excited that we've got the right people at the table doing that work, and I'm looking forward to extending that investment strategy in the future, because it ties in so much to what we've got going in front of us today. So shall I
Good.
just...
Any questions for the
Yeah.
council?
Yeah.
Who was there from which hubs were represented?
Both the ones that did receive funding from the Department of Education grants, they were there, so the funded hubs, and we invited also unfunded, the ones who applied but weren't successful this round. So the idea here is that we can't just, there's interest and energy and excitement in a variety of different communities across the state, and they're in the process of having the right people at the table, getting those metrics going, etc. And we want them to be side by side in the conversations from the very beginning, so that so that they can just merge right in as we get additional support.
I have a question. When we first started meeting, I was under the impression that the STEM Hub grants, or the first initial ones, were going to be planning grants of a smaller amount, and then we were going to kind of go back and look at because it just seemed like it changed, right, at some point, and I don't remember when that was.
So there's within the legislation that targeted those grants, that described those grants, House Bill 3232, it specified 3 to 5 hubs in that. So it was felt within the folks at the Department of Education managing have ultimate responsibility to manage those grants, and felt like that specificity should be honored, and that the funds should be used to fund those 3 to 5 hubs. What we did was we did 2 things because of the great diversity. One is we phased the grants. So knowing that people were in different places, we wanted assurances that that the ones who were selected for funding actually achieved a level of readiness to utilize the full funding appropriately. So what we asked them to do was to create a partnership plan that has specific criteria to it. So it provided 6 months of planning for those who needed to meet that bar before releasing the full funds. For those who weren't selected to get funded, we held back technical assistance scholars to pay for travel and participation in any convening that we do with all of the other hubs. So it's not the ideal situation, perhaps, but we were trying to make the most to meet the broader needs of those individuals.
And those decisions were made last fall, were they not?
They were made last fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know the council probably wasn't ready to be involved or even have much of a conversation about those decisions, but moving forward, we probably are, and I wouldn't want decisions like that necessarily made without council having an opportunity to discuss or sign off on them. I know that there's some concern amongst sitting legislators that they thought that the council was going to have a much more active sign off and or commitment and vote, so to speak, in regards to those investments. And I think it's going to be critical that we at least go through some level of process in long term.
Yeah, and I think that that exact thing will arise in our conversations today. As you know, with the establishment of the STEM Council, there was also an establishment of a STEM investment fund established under the Treasury Department to be administered via the administrative functions of the Department of Education, but to be controlled by the council. That did not receive funding in this last legislative round, in part because the council hadn't been established, no track record, no strategic plan in place. It would have been premature to put that level of funding to us right now.
Backside, but moving forward.
Moving forward, I think that would be a wonderful recommendation to put out. Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Okay, let's move on to the agenda. You want to just review the agenda with the committee and
Yeah, this is very much a working agenda today. We're going to spend some time in smaller group discussions, really, as Jim said, rolling up our sleeves, trying to take a look at some of the draft recommendations that I put in front of you last week, and others that you have or have garnered from the task force report of 2012, of which several in the room were a part of that conversation. And then what we'll do is spend some time triaging those and defining what the groups want to be putting forward, and then coming back as a whole to prioritize and consolidate those. And then whatever additional implications might be necessary for us to discuss structurally for the council, we'll be addressing in the last 30 minutes or so. Okay. Other questions about that? Okay, wonderful. Well, as I said at the outset, we're looking for 2 to 4 budget strategies. In the long term, we do have a July 24th presentation to the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee of the OEIB. At that time, we'll have to have very answers, a specific presentation, but also a paper that describes our rationale and answers a whole series of questions about the strategies that we're putting forward, how they fit into the overall OEIB strategies, what are the intended outcomes, how are we going to measure success, etc. What does that look like from a systems perspective? And so I will certainly be taking on a lot of the responsibility to consolidate the thinking of the group and put that out in front of you and iterate around that. Another date to note is that the full OEIB would like to hear from the STEM Council about the work to date prior to the July 24th. So on the June 12th OEIB meeting, certainly I will be there, and I would like 1 or 2 of the members of the STEM Investment Council to be alongside me in that process, but to give an overview of our work to date and to foreshadow some of those recommendations that would be going forward to the Outcomes and Investment Committee in July. Okay, so that's just to give you a sense of where we're going and what the timeline looks like. Vacation in August, all right? So maybe. I'm planning October, but
that'll be your pay, guys.
That'll be it. In today's meeting, I think it's really important that we are targeting the what and the why, and prioritizing the what and the why over the how. I've seen it's tempting, it's awfully tempting to see a silver bullet, and we are fraught with investments that are kind of boom and bust investments, right? You fund something that looks like it's going to move the needle, but it doesn't, or you fund it for 3 years, and then the funding is pulled, and that's not what we're about. To the extent possible, we do need to be mindful of both short-term wins and establishing credibility and infrastructures needed to be successful, as well as the longer-term vision of where we want to be going. So I know that we still have a lot of work to do to get at that longer-term vision, but I think we have a good sense of at least the direction of where we're heading in that regard. So we want to be along that path without encumbering ourselves with precision and exactness, if that makes sense. You know, we can't overly define the what, or I mean the how at this point. There's just too much other things in the system that we need to manage at this time. And nobody here has a complete picture of the system either. So I think we need to be mindful of our own imperfections and ignorance in some areas and take an engineering approach. We're going to get a great prototype today. Okay? So what I'd like you to do just before I get into very more specific directions is I'd like you to actually take a look at something that we did at the STEM Leadership Summit, and it's this page here that has the sort of spider radar thing on the back. For those of you who may have come in late, they're on the table here, this other table of documents. And why I want you to look at this is because looking across the STEM efforts on the national stage and actually on the world stage, STEM is not just about jobs. And I think we've had these conversations before. The predominant paradigm around STEM is about jobs. That's the predominant paradigm. But if we only limit our conversations to thinking about jobs, then we're going to put ourselves in a box of which we'll have very, I think, limited sort of shelf life in regard to that. It encapsulates us. STEM is critical for our society and for our world and for our individual communities and individuals in those communities for a number of different reasons. And I just want us to be mindful that there are a variety of reasons why STEM is important today, more so than ever before. And to also note that for those who have been in the system for a while and have gone through educational reforms where, you know, project-based learning, career and technical education, or vocational education, or workforce development programs, why we should be asking, why is it different this time? You know, why should we actually have hope that this time we're going to make a bigger difference than some of those other cycles previously? And I think that our enabling conditions, the environmental conditions right now, are optimal for STEM. Not only are we living in those exponential times where individuals are, you know, our students are going to redefine and recreate the world in ways that we can't even possibly imagine, but our communities and our economic needs are changing as well. So I just want you to be mindful of these as you go through our deliberations today. And if you, we can debate those at another time, though. Okay? Any questions on that or so far? And then we'll get specific.
I have a comment or maybe
Yeah.
a question. I went through a lot of the material and kind of read through everything, and as I'm listening and been through all these meetings, I guess I'm struggling a little bit with putting all of this information into some kind of context to where I feel like I'm able to pinpoint recommendations that actually make sense. Like there's a lot of them, and I don't, without kind of knowing what we're doing right now, it's really, I'm finding it really hard to try to make any connection or try to just kind of organize things in a way that that I'm thinking will sort of have the best impact on what we have right now. to try to move forward. I don't know if anybody else is struggling with that, but it seems like it's a massive system, and without having that background, I just feel like I feel like I have like a blindfold on almost. You know, it's kind of been difficult to sort of organize things in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. And I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate your candor and courage for actually saying that, because it is extremely complex. What we've tried to do with both the STEM Leadership Summit and by inviting the advisory members here today is to broaden the perspective about that system, for us to make more rational, more informed decisions, so that when you have a question about that, well, isn't somebody already doing something like that? Well, yeah, actually there is some of those efforts already underway, or yes, though we may need to make that an agency recommendation, not just something that the STEM Council is doing. So you'll see in those draft recommendations that I sent out, some are purposefully ambiguous and not pertaining directly perhaps to the role of the STEM Council itself. Why I did that was because I think it's within our best interest to make sure that we are seeing the ecosystem truly from birth to career, that as we, the Council, continue to mature in our own thinking and evolve our own level of expertise, then we're going to be able to make I guess, much more specific things. But right now, we also need to rely on the other agencies doing this work in that broader system. So we need to rely on HEC to take up and incorporate our thinking into their thinking and strategies. We need to rely on the Early Learning Council to say, oh, the STEM Council also supports us in this? Great. You know, we've got your back going into the next round. So that kind of sort of agency recommendations are going to be important for this process too. So it's not all on us as a council.
Mark, a question on that then. So the HEC, I know, is a fairly recent, organization or board coming into being. So I understand maybe the focus and the vision isn't yet written down in a way that is like distributed and understood. I say that because as you list all the different acronyms and all the different agencies, I guess where I would like to be able to figure out is where are those visions clear from a STEM perspective that we can show our support for it. In other words, as we know what the HEC tries to do, as we know what the Early Learning Council is trying to do, I think there's a way for us to become supportive and align.
Yeah.
Or see where there's something that's not being addressed because those organizations are assuming somebody else has that ball.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's our role or not. I mean, to her question, I'm trying to figure that out.
I think it will be our role as we develop systems where we're monitoring outcomes, where we're monitoring the system in a more deliberate fashion and a purposeful, intentional fashion around different investments, where the capacity and leadership within our STEM hubs becomes a critical feedback mechanism to us about policy recommendations, about the things that they're seeing on the ground and in their regions, as we can count on them as having more discretionary control over the outcomes in the regions, then we can move from perhaps a grant-driven investment policy to one that's much more outcomes-driven. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think there would be appetite for that because we haven't established the sort of the evaluation and the I don't like the word, accountability systems to ensure that the investments are making the difference on the outcomes that we're trying to move. We're not there yet. I don't think. I mean, but we will be. That's where we're heading. And so we need to know that this is a transitionary time for that. And so we're going to do the best job we can right now, right?
Right. So the recommendations can become much more concrete in the future, but maybe a little more abstract in the present is really
Yes.
where you're going, as things become clearer, obviously.
Well, let's see how the conversations today go, because there's some that are very concrete, and there's some that lie in that realm that we've got a lot of work to do before somebody gives us dollars to invest in those areas, and I recognize that. Yeah.
Well, I think we just need to understand, we're trying to prime the pump and look at things that are working and support those things. At the end of the day, it may be school districts and others who have to actually make those things systemic across their organizations. And we don't necessarily control the school boards and what they do. What we can show is programs that get the kind of outcomes we're trying to achieve, stimulate, show them, shine a bright light on those great programs. But ultimately, other people are going to have to adopt those and get funding for them or whatever it might be. And we can say they're really good programs, they're proven to get results, but we can't necessarily force people to do those things. And I think that's one of the challenges. We have some responsibility here, but we don't necessarily have the authority to make those happen. If we see a great program at one school and we say that ought to be at every school, it might be a great observation, but I don't know if we're commanding schools to change their programs necessarily.
No, but we can certainly create the enabling conditions, the environment, policy recommendations, and incentives for those changes to occur. And but that is the long-term work, right? That really is the long-term work ahead of us. So,
good questions.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of wade into this, knowing that we're not quite sure what it looks like.
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We
got a bunch of engineers and scientists, right? They got to have
the data.
Yeah, the data.
Yeah.
So plus or minus 10%. Yeah, we're good.
I don't want to take things too far sideways, but when I look at your spider web and when we did it before, I can put a 10 on every single one of these things.
Correct.
I mean, this is obviously great work. My lens, though, this is an industry council. We didn't get put on here because we're educators, and then we know what's best for the state or how secondary education or post-secondary should be done. So for me, it's got to be through the lens of an employer. What is industry? This is an industry council developed to create what does industry need at the far end of the pipeline. And we should take into account that it is a pipeline. We have to work all the way through it. But what is the North Star? And I don't think the legislator put us together to necessarily take on all of these with the same equity. I mean, if they did, they would have made this an educational industry, or an council, or an ed council, or a reformation council, or something that dealt with all these. I think we can keep a lot of these in the, very high and try to make sure whatever we do supports these things, but ultimately this is an industry council. That's what we know. I don't know education.
Yeah.
And I don't want to try to think I know how to tell the HEC or the Department of Education how to do their jobs. But I can tell you what I need at the far end.
Well, and I actually look at it a little differently. I'm a little further out than he is, so I'm actually looking for a community that is sustainable continuously, and recognizing we're in an environment that is continuously changing. We need to be educating and supporting the kids and the businesses and the environment in a way that will allow them to adapt to the changes that we're talking about. So to that point, I mean, if you roll the clock back 30 years, these industries, many of them don't exist, right? And since things have only sped up, we're looking at a future where if we don't have adaptability as part of the upbringing, we fail, and our communities fail. So it's how do we actually allow that next set of businesses, that next set of innovators, that next set of people that are going to be driving our local economy to be successful. And I think that part of what we're doing from this STEM perspective is that we understand that STEM has been driving a lot of this. And that knowledge about the STEM disciplines is going to be key to helping create that future that they live in. So from a framework perspective, we're looking at making sure that the system that we have, or the many integrated small systems that we have, are capable of delivering the outcomes, in the frame that the governor set up, right? So we're looking for people to be able to see themselves in that possible future, to be able to pick one of the three paths that we say are available, and then making sure that once we've said that those are the paths that are available, making sure they really are there, right? And that those different pathways actually lead to something that's going to be meaningful and allow people to support themselves in that future.
So it seems like along those lines with what Dwayne's saying is we have to make recommendations that show where the STEM aligns within the 40-40-20. as a very clear place to start. And then I think with respect to the other organizations, we have a common vision in many ways, which is educating people to do something that's meaningful, however that's defined. So I think where we can get into a little more understanding of where we have alignment there, then the pathways piece gets pretty easy. It's not us trying to define those paths.
Well, I think we can't.
Right.
But Lisa, to build on that one a little bit, I think we have, what Eric is saying is critical, is that it's not just the 40-40-20. That is an educational objective. The issue ultimately is, are we going to have the talent that's going to drive our businesses to creating new wealth and opportunity? And so the nature, what Dwayne's talking about is critical, is that the skill sets that are needed are skill sets of quickly adaptable learning, inspired learning, because we don't even know we can't define skills because things are morphing so fast. So what we need is very different than what was needed 30 years ago. So I think that to Eric's point is that, Mark, you started out by talking about this is not a discussion about vocation. This is not a vocational discussion about jobs. This is really about how do we equip the talent for a very rapidly innovation-based economy that will, and so that's where I think that we need to keep as our North Star very much aligned to, because that's also inspiring, because then all of a sudden people begin to go, oh, that's exciting, we want our kids to go there. In fact, we all want to go there. And that helps us get past honestly, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear because we know how we used to do it. But we don't know how we will do it in the future. And letting go of the past within the educational sphere, the same thing happens in the corporate sphere, is a little scary. But we also know that we have to. And so part of our commission, I believe, as a STEM council, is to actually take that flag and hold it high and say, come, be courageous with us. This is where we're going to take our state and our kids in this direction.
Well, and I look at the 40-40-20 as an educational objective that's broad enough that allows us to put some color to that where the skills are most beneficial. So it can be 40-40-20 lots of different ways, from Russian dance to strong STEM things. And what you just said to me makes sense. We get to influence what the outcome is of that objective from an industry and everything else.
I'm looking for that first level filter to run everything through so that I know whether or not it's following, if we're off course on the first turn we take, right? What is that very top level North Star that we can stay within 5 or 10 degrees of, so we're not all of a sudden 90 degrees off from where we're supposed to be doing here. And when I see some of these things on here, it's pretty easy to get very enchanted about changing how education works in the state of Oregon. But if that is suddenly our, if that's anywhere close to being in the top on our filtering process, we're doomed, I think. That's a nice byproduct, I think, and it can be leveraged, but to take that as a top-line mission for the organization would be,
And I think
terrible.
what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's really, I've been struggling with this and telling you this whole time. It's just like, I think I've got a sort of an idea of where we should be going, and we know that what exists right now isn't working right as well as it should, and that's why all of us are sitting here, and that's why a lot of these sort of the HEC and all these different councils and commissions and boards are working together on this, but without understanding what it is that is currently going on to change, what it is that is not working right now. For making policy recommendations, for me, it's really elusive. I'm really having a hard time seeing where those policy recommendations should be, or what our role is in making those recommendations.
Dealing with a bunch of concrete people, I think.
That's fantastic. I think when we look at, and we haven't circled back to the charter discussion about the roles and purposes of this council. As we look to the legislation itself, it asks us to make specific policy and investment recommendations to the chief education officer about meeting the needs, two goals, right? Doubling the number of STEM degrees and doubling the math and science scores at 4th and 8th grade. To me, that means that we are taking a STEM industry lens and trying to find ways to which to perturb, agitate, transform the education system to achieve those kinds of goals and other goals that the STEM Council believes is necessary. If it's the innovation side of things, rather than just filling jobs, but creating jobs and creating conditions for a really adaptable workforce, I think that is a very admirable and appropriate North Star to have as a council, should we decide on that. What are the implications then as we think about that for incenting a large, complex, risk-averse education system? How do we go about doing that? What sort of recommendations are we going to put forward? So for me, yes, we have to bring our strengths from industry to this, and the change that we hope to seek, and how we can align education with these broader outcomes. But at the end of the day, we're going to have some understanding of how the education system works in order to make, effective recommendations or strategies. And we're not fully there yet, and it is complex, and this is why we do have the advisors, and why we have other agencies participate in this process.
Well, and to your point, I mean, this is not only an education conversation, but we are actually sitting in the education sphere having it, right? So,
Yes.
so there's more things happening outside of this that influence and impact, and actually will be informed by how we approach these questions. So, that's why I love what Thompson said about having a North Star, because it really sets the tone for how we might make the policy recommendations that we do make. And if we're looking at this from a leadership perspective, there may be others that look at what we're doing and saying, oh, okay, I see how that actually connects with, workforce. I look how it connects with economic development. The innovation investments that we have, where our growth board puts its money. I mean, there are a whole lot of other things that can end up being influenced by this. And we look into that future where people are coming through this system, we have to have some measures to make sure that we're actually having the outcomes that we like continuously. So I see this as really, really important, really, really important work.
I think, last few sessions that we had, we got great input, and as we meet more and more with educators, I mean, for me, I kind of have a good feel for what next 10 years, what we need to do. All you have to do is just listen to the educator, lack of resources, lack of, educators that can teach this sort of thing. But then you go say, okay, what is 10 to 20 years looks like? That becomes a lot harder than the next 5 years, because we have so much gaps that focusing on the gaps to fill right now it makes it a lot easier than looking at far into future, and because that is a hard thing to do. But
So maybe one last question, go ahead, Jessica. Just questions
So,
and
I
comments,
guess-
and then we need to wade into this a little bit. I think we're all preventing having to wade into this because we know it's all messy. But we probably do need to wade in and then come back and resurface and say, are we going the right direction? But go ahead, Jessica.
So I guess my question is, are we at some point going to have the opportunity to learn how the system is put together currently right now, or are we going to move forward with recommendations and have sort of a secondary group sort of filter that down? I'm a little bit sort of fuzzy
Kind of
on-
what level do we want? How deep?
Yeah.
I like that, say 100,000 feet, where non-pros should probably be, advisory, okay? Versus boots on the ground, where people who really need to know what they're doing implement.
I think there's a happy medium there. I feel like, again, I really want to be effective at doing this, and so I feel like I need a little bit of background. I just don't know if that maybe doesn't even matter in this case, and that's not what we're asked to do. You know what I mean? And sort of we can make all these recommendations, and at the end of the day, it's going to sort of get put through a whole nother filter of people and kind of whittled down and changed and modified to something that does make sense. I don't know.
Yes. So at this point, we're focusing on the what and the whys, right? What's our rationale? What do we want to see? Why do we want to see that? What's the change that we would like, that we're seeking? And the how is incumbent upon the various agencies within this broader ecosystem to implement.
So we're focusing only on outcomes. Because that's what that would mean. Because otherwise, how do you...
I think to start with, we need to define some pretty lofty outcomes that would be meaningful, because from there we could work backwards, and somewhere it goes from what and why to how, and that's where I think the other agencies start to get to step in and work with how it actually needs to change.
And we're not going to do it alone over time, right? I mean, we're being placed in a pretty interesting position, trying to come up to speed on a very complex system in 6 months and make some recommendations. So I can see where there would be a great deal of anxiety behind that.
Well, I'd like to add one thing. This might be helpful. Is that I've actually recruited a small group of people, but educators, to help me understand this. So having a group of people around you that actually are the boots on the ground, that you can bounce some of this stuff up.
I wish I had the time.
And Duncan, one thing first is that in the legislation as well is that we are asked to create an advisory group of educators to work to be non-voting members, to work alongside us, and to form any other advisory groups or subcommittees that will help us to do the work. And so we shouldn't be working alone. I think given the nature of where we started and where we needed to go in a very short amount of time, we did not bring advisors on board right as yet. This is a first step today to do some of that. And as we look at more of the breadth of perspectives that we need going forward, we should establish that. Very much so, as well as other things like our own term limits and commitment to this work. There's a lot of sort of structural pieces that we need to take care of as well, and not just these. Duncan, did you want to?
Well, I'm just going to say a couple things.
With your permission, Chair.
As someone who's watched this, if it's all right, there is a lot of material on the broader vision of change, and I think I had a chance at the very beginning to share that, but that was a long time ago. But there is an overall architecture for the OEIB's work that this nests into, and I think it might be good at some point to remind yourself on the notion of learning pathways for clear standards, more contextualized learning and outcome funding models. There's a whole set of tools that are being applied to the whole continuum that I really do think this group can help really accelerate and demonstrate. The second observation is just on these goals, because I was around Kyle, others, a number of people in this room. These goals were the first stab that Eric and Jill Island and a few of you created around what the vision, and they're goals that are lofty enough to require transformational change in the system, but they are not refined at a level that I think you probably ultimately will want, as Wayne was talking about. So I would suggest that thinking carefully about what your goals are is going to be a really important contribution early on. How do you take what is pretty high level? I mean, doubling the proficiency doesn't really get into the adaptive skills and those sorts of things. And in a final report, you might want to be a lot more specific in terms of what you think the goals are.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's weigh into this a little bit. I think we come back and revisit this. I think we always need to ask ourselves, are we going the right direction, and is it giving us a place where we can feel like we're going to move the needle? So I think we weighed into this a little bit. Maybe talk about how I don't know what your plan is now to process this, but are you going to kind of review the framework that we've got here, or?
I was planning on having the groups themselves take those draft recommendations and do some triage on them. Which ones seem to not the full. So I did some processing. The one that says draft across the middle of it. If I can get it.
Draft STEM council recommendations.
Yes.
16.
There's several that they got.
Yeah, sorry. The one that's two page, well, 4 pages, 2 physical pages,
It says draft STEM council recommendations
2015, 2016. Right. And then what I'd like to do is split up into 2 groups here at this table and that table. Well, actually in 3 groups, and our other public members who have come, I'd like you to engage in this process as well as a separate group together to talk about those as well. And do some conversation about which ones rise to the top in level of importance to you.
Maybe before we do that, just tell us how you got to this kind of structure, if you will, just so I think it's helpful for everyone to hear kind of what your thinking was as you put this together.
Yeah.
As a starting place, so when we go away, we kind of sense of what you were thinking when you did this, and then that'll become a nice template, and then we'll split up the groups.
So a number of things. Certainly drawing upon my experiences within the system and outside of the system, but also incorporating recommendations that have come through the STEM Leadership Summit, through STEM Hubs, through the national work around STEM, and what tends to work in other places people have tried or are doing. Those played into mine. I wanted to, you will note that many of these recommendations, if not all of them, also arose in the presentations that we have had since the beginning. You should see those in here. I intentionally brought those individuals to the council because of these kinds of recommendations. But those, what they said really informed the way that those were then crafted here. The 2 statewide, the first 2 infrastructure recommendations are there based on what we have, the assets that we have to bring to bear. I think we have some critical leverage points for these other more specific recommendations to lay within. And one is the STEM Investment Fund itself and the work of the STEM Council, which is in that legislation. So should that be funded, it could enable us to be a mechanism by which some of these others could be addressed. And then 2, a major systemic recommendation would be around the regional STEM hubs and utilizing them to really be the eyes and ears and implementation network and build upon the wisdom of practice, which I believe too seldom do we do at a policy level, is actually listen to the field and what communities and people need to be successful.
Hey, Mark. The draft STEM council recommendations that you handed out here is 2 pages. The one that came across on the internet was 3 and had other section in it. This one doesn't have. If I look at the document
that I brought with me,
like the out of school learning in here.
Here, it starts there.
Does it start in a
Okay, so it's just formatted differently? All right.
It's formatted.
Yeah.
It came through as 3 pages, just the way it printed.
Yeah, I think it was just the printer.
All right.
Sorry.
So
I have a secret draft.
So we're going to do the council split up, and then we'll split up the publics.
Yeah. So I actually have a recommended.
Okay, we got a. I was going to hope you had to split us up. So.
Yeah, I was just. If this is all right to do, if I can find it. At this table, Group 1 here, Jim Pyro, Dwayne Johnson, Fred, Lisa, Graham, Laura McKinney, Elizabeth, if Elizabeth's here, or Luis. Okay, Luis, if you could join us at Group 1 here. Cheryl Myers, Carla Wade, and Ruth McDonald. At Table 2...
Push that table out of ways.
Yeah, we'll move that a little bit. Table 2, Eric, myself, Thompson, Herb, Jessica, Duncan, Nancy Stuber, Agnes, Melissa, John Yoder, and when Danny Ledesma comes, she'll join us as well.
So, all right, Lou, and how long?
And let's do 45 minutes and do a check-in. I've got a template when you are reaching that point of wanting to actually put stuff on paper. I have a template to do that. And I'll give that to you. Okay.
Hi, Cheryl Myers.
Hi, Cheryl. Lisa
Chief of
Graham.
Staff.
We've met before.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know either, so it's a leap of faith. It's like, oh, okay.
I'm Ruth
Well, I'm glad we
McDonald.
needed to have those kind of conversations, right?
I'm sorry. I figured you had vacated.
No, I didn't want to vacate to get another drink.
You running away?
I am.
What's your?
Oh, yeah, so I know identity.
There you go.
There we go.
Some people don't think I'm Mark.
Preferred location where you're going. Grab some chairs, come around. There's an open chair over here.
I'm good.
Are you going in our group or this one?
Mark, you didn't have me aside yet, but
Nice
Just join us.
I'm on it.
Okay.
For those other public members, if you'd like to form another group here, or there's room in the hall right outside here too.
All feels like school.
Oh, that's right. You go out of the room.
Cheryl, I wouldn't know about that.
Okay, so do we all have a same, see if we can get it on the same document.
Yeah.
We're all working on the
Are
same
there
thing.
13 items? I think is really the key.
Someone actually counted them. Okay.
Well, there's numbers on
they're
them.
even numbered, yeah.
They're numbered.
So is the objective to work through all of these, or are we just doing number one?
Or what?
Or are we doing number one?
I think he wants us to kind of talk about which ones rise to the top.
That's what I thought.
Right.
Making sure.
So,
So I think it's all 13.
It's all 13, and just to say, and I like the way maybe we take it by segment here. We can just visit each segment and say, do we like what's here, we don't like, would we add, what's missing, what would we take away? So
That sounds good, adding what's missing, because
I'm guessing the other group might start at the beginning, so we work backwards.
That's a creative idea.
I like
Start at the top as opposed to the bottom of the food chain.
Closest to us is coming out of the pipeline in industry and work in the other direction.
That's a good idea.
food-based design.
I did have a question. It's kind of an overarching question, and it had to do with what Eric said about this being an industry.
Long time.
council.
I know.
Did you get my email?
I did.
And I think one of the key pieces is what pieces can industry own in this? And I guess, so I see a lot of what Jessica's question was about, what the agencies will do, but what part of this does industry own, whether it's collaboration, whether it's connectivity, whether it's, I had a really fascinating conversation with someone the other day who talked about the global athletic industry and how, and the question to me was, when is talent identified? And it wasn't about the athletic industry, it was about the thought of when is talent identified in staff, and then conversely, how the athletic world, how is that developed, and whose job is it to develop? Well, it's everybody's job. It's after-school programs. There's a little bit of government involved, but it's a lot of community, it's a lot of parents and business, and so I guess that's my overarching question here is, where can industry be involved in helping shape that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Industry has an expectation of what they need to be successful in terms of the skill set and the people they want to hire. But to Dwayne's point, we don't know 5 years from now what we need in that period. So sometimes it's just the critical skills and capability, the foundational things that you need in people.
Well, and I wonder if there's a disconnect with what industry expects and what education believes they expect.
Well, if you talk to educators, they'd say there definitely is. I mean, you know this, right?
Right. Well, see, coming from my small business background.
Well, and the question I have is, when you say industry, what does that really mean? Okay, are you talking one industry? Are you talking all industry?
Oh, I'm talking broadly.
Right, and
broadly. Where are the jobs? Where are the careers? Where are the pathways?
because industry in that collective doesn't even identify themselves the same way, right? So if you're Nike, what industry are you part of? Okay, so, and to your sports analogy, they're selling goods into that, but they actually support a lot of the teams that are actually...
Exactly.
So
where's the farm system, I guess, is my
exactly.
And how does that interplay here?
There's the farm system, but when you talk about education and what we look at oftentimes in education, and what we hear about is from successful students, is that there was one person somewhere along the line that was their mentor, that was the one that I'm the troubled student. I'm causing all kind of havoc in a math class, but someone sees my potential. So I think it's how do we inform teachers to start identifying those potentials. You know, it may be the kid who's bouncing around class all the time that becomes the future choreographer. But we have to find those things and tease them out, pull them out, have the students help find themselves and their expertise. But teachers need a better idea of what it is industry needs and expects so that we know what to help push and pull out of our students.
So, and to that point, the sports analogy, if you're going to be an NBA, if your goal is to be an NBA star or an Olympic athlete, you kind of know what the future looks like, right? You know where you want to be, and you can measure your path there. I mean, I had a friend, my nephew was actually an Olympic contender, and she'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go practice her gymnastics, right? And she had coaches that could help her with that. So, where is that for STEM, right? Who can say, okay, I'm going to be fill in the blank, and here are the steps that you need to do to get there, and here are the mentors that will help you there. Here's how the teachers help in the classroom with that. Here's how the community helps with that.
So we need not to try and decide what industry needs, but more recommendation towards a framework that's encouraging the communication between industry and schools.
Yes.
Because then it will evolve. We don't have to.
And a larger piece of that that goes along with that is, athletics is in some ways a counterproductive example, and also very illustrative in that it's a hugely visible possibility. And the number of kids who think they're going to be a professional athlete is overwhelming. When you look at it and look at what the reality of that is. On the sort of much more normative things we're going to do in life, actually kids don't get the exposure in many cases of here's some really cool stuff you could be doing in all of these different fields, whatever they be, whether it's Russian dance or whatever it may be,
or 3D medical bioprinting.
Right, exactly, and that's from the side of working both at the university but having been a teacher, part of it is that's the area where teachers and educators need a lot of support from industry, is give kids opportunities to see
What else is out there?
What else is out there besides being a pro athlete. I mean,
So-
there's nothing wrong with
So
that.
maybe that's how we step into this. In other words, looking at how we could connect the people that would be the talent scouts for STEM to the potential STEM participants, right? So,
I mean, who are your talent scouts? It's going to be the teachers, right? They're the ones that have more interaction
here's the
with
person
kids.
that you should be talking to.
It's the talent scouts, but it's you too, the industry folks.
Right.
A number of years ago, we did a program called it Future Makers and Venture Mentor Program, and it was the industry folks who came in and evaluated the student work at the end. And the students, during that whole time we were going through the process, they were working hand in hand with industry to develop solutions to real-world industry problems. And some of them created, one of the 8th grade girls, the first or second year, created a solution to a problem that was going to save the company tens of thousands of dollars a year, just because it was fresh eyes coming in and looking at it.
And it's contextualized then. They understand why I'm learning X.
You look at the engineering that was developed around saving the Leaning Tower of Pizza. It came from a Brazilian girl, I think, that's a middle school student, and she beat out the Chinese engineers. So we need to tap our kids for those sorts of things so that they feel valued. The culture of today's students is they want to be contributors. They want to be valued.
Well, and I love the concept that it's not all about the teachers taking on more and doing more. It's about teachers connecting students to those arenas and experts and coaches and mentors that can really open the eyes of our youth.
And as you're doing that, it also gives you the opportunity to get at these sort of non-academic skill sorts of things that you often find, that sort of flexibility, adaptability, and so forth that you really need at every level of society, but that we don't necessarily convey in our traditional academic courses.
Well, when we say highly skilled workforce, those don't always fall within that.
So if I may, as we discussed this, so there is kind of, I'm sure you heard of 2 Oregons. So there is urban Oregon in Portland, and then I live in Hermiston. I've been meeting with all of our teachers, our superintendent, our community colleges, and so on. And when you go talk to them, I mean, we don't have teachers that teach science and engineering and math. We don't have equipment that provide those opportunities. So, and I'm not really sure what is going on in the metro area, Portland metro area. But I can tell you, I've been talking to the educators for years. So we do have, when we balance things, we got to balance lack of resources, lack of opportunities, and what comes first.
Rural divide.
It's not. I'm not really playing rural-urban divide, but we do. There are needs, immediate needs that we can make immediate impact. So we got to balance the two, and making sure. I am sure I know enough about our schools here that the same thing applies here. But especially more when you go to Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, Central Oregon, and all of that, that there are tremendous opportunities that this STEM Council can make a tremendous difference very, very quickly.
One connection that could happen very quickly is I do a lot of work with the Oregon Broadband Commission, and I have for the last 2 years, getting them to understand that just because the drawdown on broadband access is this today, that's not going to be what it is tomorrow. It took about 9 months to bring them up to speed, get them on board. And now what we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months of schools, because of all the deployment of mobile devices, is this huge leap in the draw on broadband.
Yeah.
And in the task force report, we included broadband as being an essential, not only at schools, but for kids to have 24/7 access, an essential for this STEM work to be successful. They have a legislative report due in November that we're going to be helping to work with, but it would be great if we could get some input from the STEM Council that supports the work of the broadband advisory, saying this is important to the success of this program as well. So the legislature sees that we are working across agencies as we're trying to move things forward.
But that infrastructure is probably not only just for STEM, it's for all types of systems, right?
It's our data systems, it's our voice, our phone systems, it's our HVAC systems, it's our emergency management, it's our telemedicine, it's all of those things, which is critical for economic development in parts of the state.
Well, this is why it gets to be a very complex question, but I mean, I'm very sensitive to what Fred is talking about because we dealt with this from the Small Business Advisory and Cheryl as well. I mean, here you have essentially a group of people that have actually very different needs, and the world looks very different when you're not sitting in a metro center, right? So, how do we actually craft our proposals in a way that allows at least enough flexibility to have decisions being made in those communities that make sense for them, as well as support the ongoing education. So, for example, the a solution to rural Oregon may be to allow access to mentors and people in the industry, 724. Okay, which means, as you say, that broadband becomes very, very important, and we actually say that in our STEM council, and we actually support that in policy, we support that in funding, we support that in programs in the school, and then we actually make some of the equipment available for it.
Yeah, I mean, the ability of that to leverage opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have.
That was, when Mark was there a couple of weeks ago, we met with our school in Eastern Oregon, and one of the things they said, I'm the only engineering company in the whole county, to be honest, in Umatilla County, and there is only a few of us going around, and one of the things, lack of access to industry was a big thing, like Ben Research, there are different skill sets, and having that mentoring between urban businesses. Intel never shows up, I'm not picking on Intel.
Aubrey's not here, so.
Southern Oregon, but they could. I mean, not in a constant way, but those are some of the opportunities that are really makes a huge difference in a very easy way. That's why I feel like optimistic that we can make a tremendous difference in many, many areas by focusing on the gaps and the needs and also filling the other bigger perspective.
So it would seem like, see if this is right, Jim, from the recommendations, there's those for the short term that maybe we can put a little more clarity to, and then also a section where we've identified some other areas that we feel we need to do more work in, like capturing broadband or capturing, or maybe we don't have a policy recommendation yet, but we've at least brought it to the forefront that we want to get there with that particular element. That way we don't have to have it all sorted out now, but we can at least get a couple.
Elements that are important to the success of this result.
Right, you know, with rural communities, perhaps the ability to leverage with the small business development centers who have fabulous video conferencing ability, where it isn't that anybody travels far, and that you do a monthly field trip to the small business development center for a class or classes, where they do interact with Intel, they do interact with CH2M, or they do interact.
Long way.
You could say we can
Not to pitch a program, but I mean, the Portland Workforce Alliance is helpful. They set all the programs up, they do everything. Industry just has to open up their doors. Because industry, to be honest, doesn't have the time to go out and recruit and do all this stuff. They're willing to maybe open up their doors for an hour or two to let people see what they do. But to try to coordinate and do all that, industry says, you know, I haven't got the time. And so
Tell me when and where to be.
Yeah.
One of the things I
We'll be there
wanted
to help
to
you out.
add, that's an excellent question as an example, but I want to make sure I put that on the table. Really, the rural area has exact same need as Portland. We don't need, I mean, that's a kind of a illusion that rural Oregon, you know, we need, you know, their needs are STEM. Their needs are, their economic development depends on well-trained, well-educated science, technology, workforce, not traditional thing that we hear. So I want to make sure it's not any different.
For much of rural Oregon, they're going to get their access to the teachers from someplace else.
Yes.
Because those teachers who have the STEM background just don't exist.
Don't exist.
And there's only 2 teachers on the staff.
Yeah, that's true.
But I
And
think
the superintendent's driving the bus.
I think that the point that what Mark was trying to do with having the network of STEM hubs is the kind of sort of facilitation that would allow some of those opportunities where, you know, you guys may not have immediate access in Umatilla, but if you're working through a hub there, that may give you access to folks through another hub or through the small business center to say, here's the people that, you know, as a network of hubs, we know the folks in our area and we can help you connect to those folks. Whether that's, you know, it may be something, you know, in Eugene, we may have somebody who's, you know, I'm a student, I'm interested in ranching, but guess what? We don't have a whole lot of that going on in our area. But, you know, we can provide resources to somewhere else, sort of.
Well, this is where it gets really interesting for me.
I'm sorry, I don't know where it's going to change. I work for community colleges and workforce development. I don't know how it's going to change with OUS now that it's all breaking apart, but the universities all have video conferencing as well, and so this would be a great way to loop in your post-secondary partners and showing the students, not only can you do this, but here's where you can do it, and here's the labs, and here's the professors, and so we could get more mileage out of it and still obtain the same results.
As long as they have computers and internet, most of our students have access to video conferencing at the desktop.
Right.
So that we don't have to go to the center anymore.
No, it's cool when you can get them there. Touch, feel, smell exists, and then and especially on a campus, then they can feel like, oh, I do belong here. I can see myself here, or whatever, and they can get mentoring through students and things too.
I came from a rural area in eastern Washington, so I'm very aware of that. And I remember when I was in school, there was no awareness about STEM, even way back then, STEM-related type of careers or conversations that were going on. I believe, as a person who just left the field not too long ago and was in touch with students for the last 30 years, that a lot of what I used to talk about with them when I mentioned STEM-related hubs is just a complete unawareness of what all that meant. and what it all, and before the conversation gets too far, they kind of tune out on it. And so I don't think we've done a very good job, and I just think we, the collective we, of really telling people about engineering, of really talking to people about technology and those kinds of things. And so I always take a step back and kind of look at, are there ways that we can, and I appreciate that maybe the industry can't come out there to every single school and talk to every group, but we have career and technical fairs and trade fairs and those kinds of things. I think it's just the exposure piece, I think, has sort of left lagging a little bit in terms of just getting students out in front of what these careers are. And maybe if they talk to an industry person or an instructor or an advisor, they become a little bit more aware, and sort of that fear about that, because I'm terrible at math, but the fear about that starts to come down a little bit. If they can hear about someone's pathway, and how did you get to X, and how did you get to Y, and hey, wait a minute, maybe that can happen. You know, there's some support along the way. Really, what kind of support is that? So awareness and support are what I feel are two big things that I think haven't been cultivated enough, at least in 2 states, now that I've been in Washington.
There's a saying, if you can't see it, it's really hard to be it.
Right. It's tough. It's tough. So.
And it's really hard for a lot of teachers. They don't know what they don't know anymore. Especially if they've been in the classroom for a long time, they don't really know what career opportunities are out there for their kids. Elementary school teachers don't have any idea what it means to be a researcher or to be in industry because they've never done it.
And college people don't either. And I used to manage an advising center, and there was constant professional development and training always going on. And in this area, it was the least informed. And even though, despite efforts, and let's get out there and let's read the literature, let's talk to people, this area continues to be the most mysterious out of all the areas I can sort of major in. So advisors need to know more about what industry wants, because they can speak for you to students in that pipeline.
So we're actually talking about, right now, part of the K-12 conversation is basically how do you connect the opportunities that are available to people that have no idea that they exist in some cases, and the cases where they do know that they exist, that they don't have the resources to be able to connect to them. Right. So I mean,
just sort of number 7.
Yeah. Exactly where it is. Yeah. So I mean, for example, I mean, again, I've traveled pretty much the state, and you can actually, if you go to some of the businesses, you actually see that there's technology innovation right in the community. Okay, it's right there. Okay, but it's the things that people don't know they don't know about. Okay, so the fact that out in the east by the river, they can actually tell you just exactly how much water they're using any second is pretty scary. But it's crucial to their business, and it's crucial to agriculture, which is a crucial part of our state's economy, right, and our livelihood. So, you know, can we actually take some of the things that are already in community and find the ways to allow the industry to apply their knowledge and skills to not only what's there, but what's coming as well. And I think that gets back to how do you create that more porous environment where industry can actually work with the communities in multiple ways. And I think to your point, when you draw, Cheryl, where you draw a big picture of what industry is, there are many different talent scouts that will come to a community when they recognize there's opportunity. Okay, so it could be the electronics folks, it could be the software folks, it could be the manufacturers of those different devices that actually manage the water. It could be it could be the management system that they use to actually manage their farm. Any of those sorts of things. And there may be one that actually resonates with a student, and then it's like, okay, now I'm excited. Now what? Okay, and the now what is part of what I think we're actually trying to answer. The now what could be, well, here's the innovation hubs in your community. Here's how we actually connect to you, the individual student that's interested in this. And here's all the body of knowledge about that type of thing that's available. So we need to be helping the teachers in that process as well, being able to access that. And do it in a way that's not threatening to the teacher, because now the teacher may be involved in something they know nothing about.
So
that brings us almost to 13.
Yeah, let's try to go through the recommendations. Let's see if we can be disciplined, because I think we can talk around this, but we got to get more. So let's look at to Lisa's point. Let's start with post-secondary. We got 4 recommendations here. Does anyone have anything they want to add, subtract, just maybe?
I would like to add a piece. I think that there's a lot of strength here in the funding for students and rewarding progress toward a STEM degree. But I don't think there's the equivalent kind of transformational experiences that you see in the K-12 area with respect to the educators, and I don't think there's so I would suggest that a lot of what you see in K-12 applies almost the same, without a doubt, in higher education. And so I would suggest that you not limit the things that you've talked about in K-12 and assume that that's happening all right in higher education, because I would say that it does not. And so I would encourage just taking the K-12 limiter off of that entire previous section. And the second thing that, and perhaps that would then, in those, I also think we need to be looking at how we're creating the programs in those post-secondary school, in the post-secondary situation, not just rewarding people for going through programs that exist, but because we know industry needs to be so much more tightly coupled with the universities to actually get the students out with the skills they need, there needs to be some mechanisms, some fundamental frameworks to bring those two together in the curriculum itself. So it's a cooperative effort to develop curriculum. And I see good student focus, but I don't see that second piece that gets industry directly connected in providing education itself inside of the post-secondary, where they are actually the ones out practicing. I really appreciated your comment about that's exactly what I see. And so I want to underline that you need to just repeat that.
I like that, and I guess where I see industry sitting on, so wherever there's the engineering programs where they get accredited, they have to have an advisory board. But how proactive and active those advisory boards are, we know could be improved. So perhaps there's something in a recommendation of out-of-the-box transformational advisory board. So the framework's there.
Yes.
It would only further support the accreditation.
Right. And these transformational experience for the transformative professional development, why are we taking somebody who's a practitioner at the post-secondary level and not going back and infusing an industry experience in their because we keep saying we want industry to come in and tell us what to do, but it would be so much more effective if the educators could go out once every 5 years and experience industry and then come back, because then they will know deeply versus relying on some external thing to influence. And so I kind of always like the reverse.
The writing teach our engineers how to write better, and then the industry experience goes back.
And we're doing stuff at the K-12 level in terms of coordinating some projects to get teachers into industrial settings for short periods to see, okay, here's what we're doing. But there definitely could be more of that at the university level too. I mean, it does happen. But yeah, I mean across the board. I didn't mean post-secondary. Yeah.
Well, but we've actually put separations between all these different groups of people working together. Okay, so when you talk to teachers, well, I need someone from industry to come and fill in the blank. Okay, I need you to be in my classroom for a specific reason. Okay, when you talk to industry folks, it's like, well, you know what? I really don't have time to actually just go to a million places because that's not what I'm about. I got to run my business. Now, if you think about in context a business and community, and you actually put the two things together, it's like, well, okay, I live in this community, and not only want to be successful, but I actually like to have more employees that understand what I'm doing. So maybe part of running my company is to actually have the teachers be part of my business in a different way, and have them be part of the school in a different way.
So would it be a stretch?
Yeah, we have a name for that.
Exactly.
Crazy. But would it be a stretch to recommend policy towards rewarding companies from a tax perspective to engage with schools differently? Not just charitable contributions here, but right? It's a win-win in many ways.
Yeah.
Because
it makes sense to me. One of the things that this group might want to look at is the National Council on Teaching in America's Future has had some great success with STEM learning studios, where they bring industry and educators together to create content, and then they industry continues to be a mentor to both the teacher and the students who are under that teacher. And I know they focus mostly on K-12, but what's to say we couldn't do that with community colleges and other
We
areas?
do. I mean, there are some successful programs where they bring those things together, and they're funded in the post-secondary area. So there are pockets everywhere of models that we can just simply borrow or extend. So the Oregon Metals Initiative has exactly that kind of project where they have an industry research problem, they fund them. At OSU, it's brilliant. The master student access the project creates these capstone projects for 4 or 5 undergraduates. They all work with the industry for a year. Those models exist, and all they need is a little funding to give enough incentive to industry to bring those programs.
And some spotlight.
Oh, yeah, people
big
knowing
time.
about it would be good.
Right. Yeah, back to your athlete show. Sure. Yeah.
Well, so the,
Go ahead, Fred.
yeah, so couple of things
That's our goal.
that I like. I was going to ask Lisa if I heard what she said, that you wanted to recommend an advisory board for each schools. Is that what you said?
Well, in a sense, a lot of them already have advisory boards.
Nobody has it. Which school has closest?
Oregon State.
All ABET accredited engineering programs have to have an advisory council that has industry input. It's required or they don't get accredited. Those boards are anywhere from incredibly proactive on curriculum to
Consider the junk that
they show up once a year. Right. So
That's news to me. Because I
I'm
don't
actually
know.
going to one tomorrow, and
Are
I'll be
you?
looking at
Which
it.
one is that?
Oregon State's Chemical Engineering Board.
You have a
I actually
advisory.
I'm on the Oregon State Engineering Advisory Board, so they have advisory boards with industry people who come together and say, this is what we need, and this is what we're seeing, and what are you doing, and the
For
dean
each engineering school.
school within
if
the.
you want to be accredited, yeah.
And then something happens,
But I
right?
love the idea of
Right.
expanding that.
Yeah, I think that is.
Well, and it's how the dean wants to use it. The dean sometimes just put it off to the side, say, I gotta
Yeah,
have it, and I
yeah,
don't want to use it, and
because,
others really want to engage with
I
them
know
on where I need to move my program.
Lots of resistance.
For any of the CTE type programs, they
industry, which is one thing that when people think of STEM, they often think of the university level, but I would encourage you to remember that the community colleges they're working in their local area, which is important for a lot of students who want to stay here. I want to stay here, and all I can think of is, Intel, well, that's clear over in Portland. That's not for me. I'm not going there. So we need to remember the agricultural and all the different pieces that are right there in the local areas and the rural areas.
And I've seen along those lines, I've seen a couple conversations recently between universities like Oregon Tech and some of the community colleges about a joint program where their professors are on each other's sites. So someone can get a 2-year and then the 4-year and they see it. And they're not taking classes they don't have to have and double. So how we can encourage that more broadly might be a very simple thing.
And I think that, again, it's a matter of some of this is just convening the right people at the right time. So I know all 7 Oregon universities are going to engage in different systems for internships. And then industry is going to have to go to different systems to fill. They're now going to be unified. Now we just want to go to the community colleges. So some of our philosophy may be, like if we were going to go way up to the top level, shared frameworks, right? Shared substrate, like the broadband is a shared substrate. The internship program access is shared substrate. And so if we can just build that, then we can start to plug things in and all the local folks can immediately get access rather than trying to solve it in a local. Find the big things that extend everywhere and allow the local folks to focus on the truly local.
Well, to your point, it's like, and I want to get back to the list here because we need 2 to 4 of these things by the end of our conversation. Can we make it easier for people to interface with, from an education, from a business perspective? So let's say you want to be a talent scout. Well, I don't care about the difference between higher ed and K-12 and RUA.
Exactly. Don't care about your silos on the other side.
Don't know, don't want to know. It's like, what do you need? And can I get what I need out of that system there, right? So if there's a way to do that, it makes at least industries like easier interfacing with with education. Now, I love Lisa's idea though about policy that allows the industry to work alongside with education, because if you actually create that one-stop shop for education for industry, and then say, oh, by the way, we're going to create policy that allows you to interface with that easily. It's an easier sell.
Well, that's
on the same side of the table.
Exactly.
The model that we've kind of been looking at in Lane County is that we know that the industry folks there and software is a relatively big deal in Lane County, surprisingly, but it's mostly a lot of small shops, and we've got big research operations at the university and some with LCC as well, and the school districts, and we're finding that the number of small folks in industry are getting lots and lots of requests, and they're getting to the point where they just go, okay, stop, we can't deal with this.
Death by 1,000 boards.
Exactly. And so the piece that they've done is they've been working with Tao and started to pull together, okay, let's get ourselves organized on the industry side so that we have a single point of contact. And we're doing the same thing on the educational side. So now we're having this sort of informational pipeline. Forget about the student pipeline, just an informational pipeline of all of you small industry firms tie into Tao for anything that's software or IT related. And then they can connect to Connected Lane County, who's the Regional Achievement Collaborative, which then can branch out to any of the educational institutions in the county.
Tie into those regional achievement collaboratives, because that's all areas of education and community and business, and all of it's right there, and that's a great point.
And then they can tie up, because then you can tie to the statewide infrastructure in higher ed, for example, that needs to work to support those regional pieces.
Right, and that's you'll see. I mean, there's a parallel going on here in taking. We're developing in our local industry that sort of small version or small splinter of Tao to serve our local geography, but they're going to be tied to what's going on, largely in the metro area and the activity there. And on the same side, Connected Lane County is tied into all the regional achievement collaboratives. So the communications, while we have a local direct pipeline, we also have this sort of loop that we can sort of share that information back and forth at a higher level.
Well, but let's tie that back in, because that to me is partially an infrastructure conversation as well. And once again, we need to get 2 to 4 of these things down here. I want Jim to blow up over there.
You know what? It's interesting, because one of the things that Mark said over and over again was we should be on the why and the what, not the how. And this to me is a list of hows. Right. So I don't even know how to interact with this, because I'm like, there's 27 hows. Could we go back and talk about the what and the why? Because I think there's a lot of consensus.
What if we pick some what and whys that are our 2 to 4, and then we can assign the numbers to where we think they fit?
Yeah, I think
good idea.
that.
Numbers could go
Because
multiple
we've talked
places.
about what being we need to connect. That's a what. And I don't care if it connects through broadband or teachers going in and out of classrooms or whatever, but it's like the porous boundary is the what.
Well, I've heard facilitating a framework of communication between industry and education as maybe an overarching.
I like that.
Why or what?
It's a what.
It's a what?
It's what. Yeah.
Well, and to me, I had a hard time getting past 1 and 2, because at the end of the day, it's like if you don't adequately fund any of this stuff, none of this is going to happen.
How again? These are all how.
Well,
so the other.
It is a how, but it's not saying how you're going to fund it.
Oh, right, that's right.
It's just, it needs to be funded.
Funding is important.
Right,
Yes.
the resources are important, and the collaborative approach, I think, is important.
Yeah, I mean, it is a how, but only in the support structure.
Yes.
It's not do this, do that, do this.
Right.
It's here's the pieces that we need in order to get everybody together.
Right. So yeah, if you want to get to the what, and get to it through that collaborative approach.
It seemed like we need some sort of what around motivation.
Yeah, that's, we heard about that.
What's the motivation?
So part of that. It's like branding of STEM somehow is bad.
Why go into STEM? Why should industry people who don't go into, why should students go incur $100,000 in school debt and then go make $40,000 a year teaching STEM in schools? Maybe we have some motivation
Why
things that are in the way of getting teachers. That,
But also, Lisa, you go through 1 through 10, and we are successful, 100% successful, right?
Okay.
We got the kids to university, into engineering, into science. 50% of them fail and go out of engineering. That is a big problem. So we do all of these tens of millions of dollars, and then we have 50% failure rate in our school in Portland, in Oregon. In the rest of the country, there are some areas 70% failure. So I like to see us, and I don't care what dean does what. I like to see that, to reduce it to 20%. 50, 40, 45%, 20%. You figure out why you're dismotivating our kids to go further into junior year and senior year to finish up. You figure out if that part of it is money, part of it is a scholarship, part of it, but you get kids there.
Well, but I'm going to go back to what Lisa said. Why is any of that relevant? Okay, because I'm a failed engineer. Okay, I had a double major in computer science and electrical engineering. I did not get degrees in those. Okay, and I mean, I went through that whole time where the whole engineering field basically contracted. Okay, so once again, you spend your time, all this hard work going through that to find out, well, there's nothing for you. Okay, so the skills are useful, but why would someone go through that? Even if they were extremely interested, why would they want to go through that? And if we're not answering that question, then.
So one of the things that might help with that, and it might be another high level, was something that Duncan mentioned about looking at incremental proficiency, and that applies. That could be another broad aspect. Anything that's allowing people to incrementally learn and obtain credentials. I know in post-secondary is critical because there's so much change and there's so much retraining, and they don't know what they need to do, and they go in and out of the system. Like you said, they fail out. Well, they shouldn't fail out. We should stop at a 2-year degree and let them be successful at a level, and then maybe come back in and re-engage when they're ready. So there's this sense of we have this human carnage, but it's almost as a consequence of having this 4-year, which is really 5 or 6 year, $100,000 all or nothing bet that everybody has.
But I think if you really
not letting them through, even
exactly.
Qualify.
Even
if you really, at least my experience, I would love to hear from others. The same reason our kids from K through 12 are not going in science engineering, the same reason that they fail in our college. Dismotivated, unprofessional people, teachers that are, what we discussed, they don't teach well, they don't motivate kids. I think those are some of the problems we face, and I think that needs to be that part of motivation. Not that they're bad teachers, we are not motivating them.
We have different students than many of our teachers were trained to teach.
There you go, I like that.
Yeah.
Right. We look at K-12 and your high school graduation as a benchmark. You look at community college, community colleges as a benchmark, a successful 4-year or post-secondary degree. But our kids like small chunks. One of the conversations that I've been a part of in other places is looking at badging. So it's like a system certification or something else, where you put together, I want to be an engineer, but I don't know if I want to invest all that money. I want to play with it first. Let me get a badge that says I have this industry skill set to match. And then I can get some more experience and decide to go this direction. I want to be an electrical engineer.
And in fact, really what that's doing is extending even further something that American education actually does very well in terms of flexibility that other places don't, which is we are a very late decision process. You know, in many places in Europe, by the time you're entering high school, basically you're tracked.
You are definitely
You are going to the university or not.
My fear is that we're deeply into how.
Yeah.
Okay, and one of my fears about policy is you try to embed how into policy, and it doesn't work very well. Okay, so I think that we might want to step a little higher level in our conversation.
I think it goes back also, so we've got in these earlier stages that career learning experiences, we talked about extending to post-secondary, really streaming all the way through, but how does it change the trajectory of a fourth grader who finds out that indeed, right today, Lisa, we can, that technology can take your cells, grow the cells and medically bioprint a spleen for you that your body won't reject because it's your cells. How does it change the trajectory of that child's experience of science, of math, of just the other possibilities when without that knowledge, they might think healthcare is a doctor, a nurse, or a dentist, maybe a hygienist, but you don't have that big continuum. And again, these continuous opportunities for more role models, more opportunities, broadening perspectives, because at the end of the day, by the time a student gets to post-secondary, they've got to be driving their own education. They've got to be...
Well, that's pretty with K-12 there, and the teachers that I've talked with, and my brother's a superintendent, and we've tested the hell out of these kids so much, and have taken all of the creativity out of the teachers.
They don't love learning.
And the teachers aren't able to do a lot of the creative types of things to help the students grow their imaginations and see more of this, and we take the fun out of them before they even hit middle school.
I think number 9 is really, I marked this down before I got here. Somehow, I don't know how it fits into the what, the how, or the why, but at some point, something, I would like to see that in one of the policies, because Oregon, there was a study that came out in last April from Horizon Research, and Oregon is dead last in the number of minutes of science instruction in elementary school of all 50 states.
When they were the most curious.
So it's like, the pipeline, you've got to start feeding the pipeline at the beginning, and we're not doing that. So, and the studies show that kids decide between 5th and 8th grade that they either do or don't like science and other STEM,
good or not good at it.
And what we're going to talk, it's the how, the badges, but what I'm really throwing out goes back to that motivation and the incentive to change the way we're doing business. It's not working.
So it's hard to be motivated about something you don't know about.
You weren't supposed to. We need to have a policy or have a plan to think about education differently.
There are two pieces to that addresses, and that motivation is one. But the other side of the motivation is, many kids come in with a preconception that, I'm not good at that, I can't do that, I couldn't possibly do that. What that begins to address, and it is a little far down the rabbit hole a little bit, but it begins to address that we give you a very small slice of it, and you can be successful at that. And now you're no longer thinking, I couldn't possibly be a doctor or an engineer or whatever, because that's just out of the realm of something I could do.
And it brings industry back in, right? You want to do this porous boundary. If you're talking about industry certificates, industry honored skills, and that's another way to make the barrier more porous, because you're engaging them and saying, this micro thing is important, rather than saying, what do you want to graduate? You go, I don't know.
And I think it is far down, but I do see that as being sort of part of that that's number 7. You're talking early career awareness and learning experiences. So not only that, but successful learning experiences.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, literally, if we're talking about a policy conversation, that sets the stage for all the discussions we're talking about here. It's like the how you do that, well, it may be different in different places, but now if you're saying that career and industry has an opportunity to participate, now we can figure out what those structures look like to be able to have that happen.
I like that level of dialogue. Right? Yeah.
Did someone write that down?
You got it?
Well, and you were saying the learners are different today, and
Yes.
the immediacy and the reward, the fast reward of a badging type of system is very compelling.
If they can see it and it's tangible.
Yeah, it's instant gratification, which is the world they live in.
And it's Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and
And you did, you marked your advancement through the book.
It's flexible, it meets what is going to be in front of all of us for the next 40 years, which is we're going to be retraining, we're going to be developing new skills. So it's really not just your Girl Scout badge, which I love mine, but it's also...
Sash was a thing of beauty, right?
But it's also this idea that it honors learning throughout life and gives us a chance to continue to engage.
But it needs to be rigorous and have high standards so that when you know you get it, it's there. It's not just something you got because you showed up.
And that's where industry comes in and sets that bar.
Yeah. And expects that when someone comes with that badge, they can do what they're asked, what it represents.
And you can do that for non-cognitive things as
It
well,
follows
like the soft skills.
It follows the awareness, right? Once someone's aware of it, it's like, okay, well, here's, now that you want to be an Olympic athlete, well, you know what, you're not going to do that sitting on the couch, okay? So,
You can't do that with the meat game.
the Red Cross pumps. So to your point, the rigor becomes part and parcel.
Well, and where does this come from in that farm system of, the camps that exist in breaks and in summer and after school and, where do those pieces connect with industry?
Yep, so that should be part of the recommendations is looking at that. Not defining it, but
that's
looking at it. And I think along those lines, these badges, it seems to me, it sounds like, there's badges around, say, engineering or computer science. I question how we're doing health and to health technology as a state, and what is a clear path for somebody not just to become a nurse, but to become a nurse practitioner, and there's 13
It's completely crazy. The industry, the health industry has no idea what the jobs will look like.
Right.
And so they're going to the schools saying, we don't know what the jobs look like, but we need more of them. And the university is saying, you need to tell me exactly what program we're going to devise. And so they need this even more, these incremental, micro, flexible
that are lateral.
And legislation to help our universities not get in a big squabble over who owns what part of healthcare.
So trying to get us focused back on...
Sorry.
I tried, I gave up.
Is there? I'm advocating that we actually pick some variation of number 7 as one of our areas.
Yes. But not in the K-12.
I didn't modify it.
K through 20. Early and ongoing.
Across the K-20?
Early and ongoing.
Career awareness and career-related learning experiences.
Okay, so how would you modify that across the what? Across the
Cradle to career.
I was going to say it's a life.
Why do we stop?
Okay.
STEM is lifelong learning.
Yes,
We all
it's
For your life.
I agree with that actually.
And you're really saying that number 5 is really, K to grade.
And it would be nice to have the phrase role model or something in there as well.
Instructors is really
more than just experiences. But I think if you look at the equity lens,
way of teaching.
That role model piece is big.
Did you get successful in there?
Sure, we give it that.
Successful learning experience. And the reason why is because we too often offer our students who are students in poverty or our ELL students or our disadvantaged students an opportunity, but it's not successful. I think successful is a critical piece in terms of addressing equity for our students.
And by success, you don't mean they adopt that career. By success, they feel like the experience is valuable to them.
Okay. So fostering early career awareness and career-related successful learning experiences in STEM across the entire
lifespan.
And
you can almost take it across.
Bust to dust. Across the learning continuum.
Okay,
I like that.
Okay, that'll work. Across the learning continuum.
And then you can just take, the post-secondary out.
Right. So that makes it for everybody all the time. Well, that actually speaks to really
That's exactly right. That's exactly what they really
Probably originally said.
Probably would want to add mentorship too in there, probably.
Yes. Well, even in his summary of K-12, that overall goal, it shouldn't just be K-12. It should see.
And that's one of the things that we said, that K-12 goes away.
I just want
Well, and the more that we're trying to break break down the silos between all the educational areas
And
where we
we have a document
no
that actually.
We should have a no silo
Round
rule,
is-
right? No silos.
There
all
is
learners.
something along policy here of looking at where to get it, people on the same side of the table, not trying to vie for money.
That's what-
Right.
Right, we have university versus here, we have community colleges versus industry versus money versus. I think if our recommendations force it together,
Yes.
one that's fun, but
Walk in and go.
That was part of what you were
It's not
talking
how deep I can reach into your pockets as the industry person I am.
And when you incentivize it, and if you talk about, well, you could do that the same thing with the universities and the colleges. You could say you get extra points and whatever it might be.
Exactly, we should work together.
Yeah.
Yes,
Like
we
with
don't
the
want to see by yourself.
compacts, there's measures on there that say, how are you partnering?
Yeah.
That can be another measure like that incentivizes some of
our
that.
framework is fundamentally needs to be on a foundation of interrelated effort.
Yes.
Then everything
And not separated and siloed.
Yeah, it needs to be clearly elaborated.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I think in the STEM Hub grants was not as well done as it could have been.
Sorry, I had to jump.
Just from our personal experience, that there were some elements of it that didn't fit with the procedures in place in some of the institutions to how do you address that. So I mean, that's a different conversation.
Okay.
Part of it, and I don't know if this is, I'm just thinking about, we keep talking about STEM and communicating STEM and all of that kind of stuff, and I think starting it really, really, really early and not using the language that we're using, because I think a lot of students have it in their minds that this is what STEM is, and I don't like math, so don't talk to me about STEM, I don't want to know any of that kind of stuff. So it's part of that knowledge and that career, and we get them interested, and then you'll go, that was algebra.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know what?
Yeah.
We talk about STEM rather than the problem, and I think the thing to focus on is the problems. You say, here's the societal problem, and naturally requires. I mean, global warming. You need math and science and engineering and everything else, and we have these critical issues. So instead of using the word STEM, which divides again, it's divider. Let's use the problem.
Here we're going to do science. Now
It's
we're going to
not
do science.
just your students.
It's not the problem.
That's a huge thing, particularly with your elementary teachers. I worked at OMSI, I had 35, 40 teachers every summer. And Ruth would come in and I'd say, well, can you teach the chemistry class? She'd say, I can't teach chemistry, that's hard. It's like, do you?
Fighting the battle.
So it's building the confidence in the
I don't cook.
I got you on that one.
But it's true, and that's what we're doing with some of the developmental ed redesigns in community colleges is with math. Instead of saying, today we're going to learn how to do integers or something, it's more like, here's a problem, you figure it out. Oh, by the way, you just did this.
They do that in the interactive math program in high schools, which is not broadly adopted. And so it feels like if we look to language, make sure the language here is not about dividing, but uniting, and take that as a.
I believe.
Well, that goes back to, silos in elementary school, but in middle and high school too, where you have the science teacher and the math teacher and the CTE teacher, and never the twain shall meet.
Oh, and in college.
And
Yeah,
college
and
too,
university.
How do you set up, you have to change.
Okay, folks,
Yeah.
back to
You are ready to go in. Taskmaster.
Wayne's got a
Okay, so, I mean, we've got one down.
I thought we had two, because I thought we were doing the professional
do five?
development.
Okay,
And
so,
saying that needed to be transformative professional development also for educators from K to college.
okay, so my challenge with that, and for me, this is actually a question for you, Cheryl, in that, to me, that seems to be getting into how the organizations operate. In other words, I suggest that we do need some sort of professional development program, but now that's actually talking about how teachers are prepared for instruction. At least that's kind of where that goes for me.
I think if you just go back to the what of making tighter connections between broad industry and educators, I think then they can figure out how.
So,
I would say 5 and 10 then would be examples.
would you not be able to do that under 7 then, if it's really about relationship?
That, when they go into.
But that's more student focused
But that's
versus
more student
educator.
focused versus educator.
Okay.
So I do think you need a what.
I guess that's funny because I didn't look at it that way.
I can see your
Good point.
It's about a professional, it's about career.
Well, we can include it in 7 and talk about
Yes.
student and educator experience.
Yeah,
I would
because
like
I
the
read
teachers
it.
to be
Wait, you did. But you can have 2 subs now, and so for those 2 perspectives,
Yeah.
5 and 10.
Yeah, why have an
and these
extra
other
bullet?
things.
Let's just put it all together.
Right. Well,
I
now we
do
can
think
have
though
some
that somehow you don't want to lose the emphasis on supporting, I mean, at the elementary and even middle school level where you don't have, you have a shortage of teachers that have the background to teach.
Right. Well, my response to that would be that if you aren't aligning teachers in some way with what their needs are, then you're failing. Okay, so it's not just a teacher conversation, it's a teacher conversation, administrator conversations, everybody being on board and understanding what their needs are. So out of that policy, I would see being able to actually segment it for different groups of people.
Well, just from the background of where I'm at, something that I thought, but I think it's too far and too narrow, but when we talk about what's in 11 in terms of providing funding for students in STEM areas, to be honest, it's more of a need to provide funding for teachers, to develop teachers in STEM areas. The students, the classic example is computer science. Computer science, they give up opportunities to make 6 figures in computer science programming to get a $35,000 teaching job after just having spent 6 years in college.
Not happening.
To get their bachelor's degree and a master's degree either in teaching or in their subject area, and then additional classes to get certified.
Right.
This is the motivation.
Who wants to do that? Yeah, who signs up for that?
But I'll give you pushback.
Not a big ROI.
You need to have a degree in computer science to teach computer science.
Yeah, there's another.
So, developing skills.
But you do have to have some knowledge of it, background.
Yes.
Right. So
And that's where the professional development comes in, or,
But like you said, there are multiple routes to do this, so I don't think it's there.
Well, but once again, I'm trying to at least not embed stuff in policy that ends up.
Yeah, that's why I think I thought it was too far down the road.
I think it's the how is motivation happening. Not how to do it, but we need motivation.
Where are the systemic places where motivation disappears in places that we need?
Right, either for teachers to get the extra credentials to get enough background to feel like they can, or for a student to decide they want to go into science, or a student who loves computer science and would go in and teach it. Somewhere along the way we lose
university
all.
professor to work with industry.
Right.
There are systemic motivational problems for that.
Well, so here's an example. I mean, this is why you have the certifications and the learning hours, right?
Right.
Okay, so if you say from a policy perspective, you must spend X amount of time actually sharpening your skills in the STEM areas. Well, you can do that however you choose to do it.
Exactly.
It's not up to us to dictate what that looks like. We just might say that it needs to happen.
That's
Okay.
right.
Oh, by the way, it needs to be in somebody's budget so that it does happen, right?
Exactly.
And that's where part of the breakdown is. Like, well, what's the first thing to go? Well, all your professional development, that's your problem, right? But we expect you to be able to teach that.
So is it something about incentivizing the whatever it might be? It's the incentivizing of the faculty to engage with that, and then incentivizing the employers
It's
to
providing
get
the
a
right,
tax break.
providing the right
I mean,
incentives.
just to have it be that overarching though of incentivizing this connection. And it
How
can
are we
be-
going to motivate? But we don't have to do the how. We just
Right.
need to identify there needs to be a change in motivation.
Yes.
Because it's not working the way
And
it is now.
incentivize, yeah, whatever you
So,
need to
for
do.
example,
Respond with incentives to a motivational initiative.
So, for example, if we said that 1% of the education budget went to professional development for STEM teachers, okay, and that showed up however it needed to show up to make that happen, I mean, to me, that's the type of policy conversation you should have. But getting prescriptive about what they must be doing and how they do it, I don't think you want that.
I'd even step back from your prescriptiveness about setting aside the professional development, because some of the motivational issues have nothing to do with professional development. It's about what the systemic incentives are inside, say, the higher education system. They don't get tenure. They don't get rewarded for working with industry.
Right.
Yeah, see, so it's not even, so they'll do the professional
Well,
development.
but here's the thing, from what I just described, you can actually make a relationship with industry, and there will be dollars for it by definition. Okay, so it's not like something that can play, money games with those development dollars. It's actually, here's where they must be spent. You can figure out how they need to be spent, and if there's a relationship between industry and in the teachers that actually says, oh, well, if you go over to Intel and you spend half a day over there, gee, that's your professional development. And industry says, great, the person comes in and is paid for it, and they actually learn more about what we do. Sure, come on in, we'll have to figure out how to make that work. As opposed to, well, you know what, there's no money for your development, so spend it for yourself, but you gotta have it. That's a lot of difference. So, but, yeah.
So maybe the word explore or investigate,
The question is always around.
potential for this versus
Prescribing it right now.
exactly.
So are we looking at some sort of policy statement on around number 5?
I was thinking not necessarily 5 for a minute, but just a brand new statement around exploring the potential for changing the motivational structure for ensuring.
Can you write that down in the way back?
I would even
So,
I would step away from exploring
Okay.
because exploring becomes too
defining.
yeah determined. Yeah.
Defining something for a minute, process or something for transforming motivation to produce students with a desire to be in science, to teachers who are now well trained. What are our outcomes? Right. So what are our 3 outcomes? And we want to figure out what the kind of need help with the words. Explorer's too loosey goosey,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
prescribing.
But you want that exploration embedded in the
Identify mechanisms to increase motivation, resulting in
Or to
Jim's
motivate,
outcomes.
just to motivate.
To motivate.
To motivate.
I like that.
Not even
So identify mechanisms to motivate. Period. And the outcomes for students.
Boom, boom, boom.
Put shock things in
How about
there.
it, is that something like define potential motivational structures for employers, educators, and students to achieve desired STEM outcomes?
Yes. And then we define what those outcomes, which are back to our number of 4th grade.
I mean, you're looking for motivational structures. What that means, or
Right.
systems,
Right.
I guess, is systems.
Because I think if we get into the nitty gritty, what we hear all the time is, I can't do that because there's no money in the schools to support that. I'm first teacher in, first
Find all the
teacher
why
out.
you can't instead of
Exactly.
why you can.
Right.
Right.
So if we, and then if people come with requests for funding, either to us or someone else, it'll be hard to
You need
use.
number 1.
You do.
We threw it all
That
out.
number 1 is all just interesting.
We're trying to
Can we
do
move
big
back to
what?
9 really
Big
quick?
what?
And I was thinking where we were slotting the whole STEM and don't want to be, I'm not good at that. If we change the end of that sentence to say increase time availability for innovative experience.
I like that. I started with
Take it out of
time.
the Department of Ed. It's in the colleges. They have
It's,
that
it's
very
broad.
rigorous, you know.
So urge
Okay.
educational
So,
boards, groups, leaders.
so what I'm hearing coming up again and again and again is a transformation of this whole concept of the learning continuum.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Sounds like OEIB or something like that.
But it is. And it is.
that's right.
It should
So maybe that's how we actually frame our conversation as this council going forward, is we actually look at the education continuum as opposed to all these different silos that make it up.
be. Stay out of that.
And exactly, stay out of
Sort it
that.
out.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Right. Because
Yeah.
we can, get up
We just
above
expect
that.
them to play well together. That's our expectation.
That's the OEAB's
Well, we assume that they're all,
challenge, right?
yes.
That's their problem. We'll just put it this way.
Kick that uphill.
We keep modeling it. We keep modeling it.
They have to have, that's
Well, in aspiration, I think that's true. If we're talking about the learning continuum, and we're talking about how to prepare people for a future continuously, learning may never end.
right.
In fact, it
It
does.
doesn't.
It doesn't, or you die, right?
Learning you die.
It doesn't happen when I graduated high school.
Well, and I should tell you what I learned in computer science in '82. How relevant that is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Or sooner. How about the 70s? Keep punching cards. We do that all the time.
So,
Where do we end up on that last issue? You're talking about number 9, something to increase. What do we end up with?
Increase time availability for innovative experience.
I think if we're narrowing it down to 2 to 4 things, that to me me seems so small and embedded in some of the other things we're talking about that.
Well, I think it was in reaction to the fact that there sometimes is no science in elementary school in many,
But
many
it's not just science, it's still
It's not
staff.
just science. That's why it's innovation.
But that, to me, if we're talking about these sort of incentive structures to get at those goals,
It should happen.
these things should fall,
Those
that
should
kind of
fall
thing should
behind
fall
it,
into
right.
it,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's true. Yeah.
So,
So we have like 10 minutes left, right?
Right.
Okay,
So is there another?
Jim's all ready to report
I've
out
got
on
two of
something.
them. I've got two that we've agreed on. There's something about infrastructure too that I thought was pretty important, but I don't know what it is. But
I'll be frank. I like the first two in some capacity or another. And here's my
First two.
thinking.
The infrastructure.
Number 1 and 2, because number 1, you got to have the dollars to do this. None of this stuff works out without a structure of continuous funding that goes into it. Right. And the second one is the hubs are the vehicle for actually reaching and interacting with the community.
Statewide.
Exactly.
Without prescribing it.
Right.
Right.
So the hubs are the human infrastructure that we use to actually essentially implement and
Well, the hub model also brings back the tight-loose model, where we're not dictating those local communities, local control. People can feel like they really have their dog in the fight.
So can I ask a question, just because I don't have the background, about how that it went from 6 to 8 regions to 4, that they're going to maybe fund all 14 applicants, or?
So your sense is that all the
I really think
just resources. I think they only had so much for so much, and so
No, but I mean, was there a rationale for saying that we thought like if you look at the other states that have the regional hub network model, most of I can't think of any of them that have their state broken up into that many regions.
Well, and also, we have the LWIBs and the regional solution centers, and now we're trying to put 14 STEM hubs. It feels like we should just settle on one of these and say, let's follow,
drive it all through,
and to your point,
unify it.
I would actually get out of the quoting of numbers of how many hubs need to exist, as opposed to we need to have hubs exist. There'll be however many they need to be, and we'll figure out what resources we're going to run that.
less on the number.
We shouldn't build something from whole cloth when there are things that exist that we can work with. I think that's one of the principles of a lot of this stuff. It's there, let's not stand up something new.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't saying that we shouldn't have the STEM hubs separate from the regional achievement collaboratives or the early learning hubs or whatever, youth development hubs, whatever. I was just wondering about, originally it was talked about to have 6 to 8 hubs, and now it's like, oh, we're going to have 14. And if you look at some of the other states, like in Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Washington, they've kind of drawn lines or set up their regions and said, go figure out how you're going to work together in your region. Because if you have so many, you're going to water it down to where none of them can accomplish anything. Just a thought.
The whole STEM hub concept probably has some additional refinement.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, there's a real trick to figure out what's the right number. I think that at the Regional Achievement Collaborative level, we had that same question.
Yeah.
Knowing that, going back to one, that each one of those is going to need some sustainable resource commitment to make them work.
To make them work, right.
So-
And I just wonder about
So what I did
specifying the number in
is
that.
I took off everything after services.
Yep, that's what I was thinking.
Right, so don't talk about the existing hubs and don't talk about the number of regions, because you don't know the answer to that, and that may very well change. But the aspiration behind that is that there is a regional network and it is funded, okay? And number 1 is how you actually get that funded. It's like the funds actually are allocated on an ongoing basis, and one thing I might add, and this is, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but I actually like to see programs that embed things into existing structures when possible. So this is not an ongoing funding source to run all the hubs, right? There needs to be dollars in other programs that actually support education, support collaboration, whether it's from local community, from education system, from industry, whatever. But I think the ask in having the legislature continuously put up dollars to support something through a grant process is not the best way to do that.
So in other words, they need sustainable funding after the initial grant from this pool of money.
Well, so the way that
Maybe expand the development and sustainable support.
Where would you put that? Oh, sustainable, I see.
That's right.
Out of curiosity, aren't those both hows though? Really, they're not whats, are they?
Well,
That's how you do with some of these things, right?
Well, I'm actually trying to back some of that out of there. I don't really know how it happened, but what you suggest
But
is
that they exist.
Exactly. So I'm not telling you how the funding is going to work. I'm telling you how it may not work, but it doesn't work.
So maybe you don't want to say expand the development, but just say support the statewide network of regional hubs.
So instead of going to
And then we'll figure out the how
so
later.
support.
Okay, so
Sustainable support.
so which sentence are we modifying?
Sustainability is the key.
Sustainable support for a statewide network, and then take off the last portion of that paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stay away
It
from
really
funding.
needs to be the what is the purpose of this? These hubs are there for collaboration and they're for all these things, and we think it's a good thing.
Right.
So it's almost like you don't even have the first, you start with, we're going to catalyze economic workforce, education, community development.
Yeah.
The regional STEM hubs is simply one
That's a tool.
mechanism.
Right.
Do it.
True.
Yeah.
True.
You're right.
And then you can choose not to do it in an area where there's something else already there. They don't.
It got lead there.
That's the what. You need to create this kind of environment. How you do it is
Right. You're right. You're absolutely right.
the schools.
Oh, I love it when we get more degrees of freedom.
Yeah.
That actually then
That's part of writing is to erase words.
Well, I think the other thing is the same one with one. One sounds like a how. It's not.
multiple pieces.
I think the what is
the how.
What is the what?
facilitate. You need funding to facilitate all this. It's, as opposed to, it's almost like saying, "Give me the money, I'll figure out what to do with it." As opposed
Well,
to,
and you're right, because it's not just funding.
yes,
Right.
human support. There's all kinds of things.
Well,
that
there's
happen.
also other resources that go into that.
The what starts at the little letter A, and then the STEM Investment Fund is again
That's a tool to do
a
that.
tool to do that.
Whatever makes sense.
So we can recommend that that's an example tool for each one.
Yeah, and how you do it is we need a consistent form of funding. If we're really saying what the what is, we need increased access to evidence-based programs. We need incentive design. We need these things.
Well,
And
and to Mark's point, though, he did say that some of these are not the what, right? I mean, the whole spectrum is here. So
He was just testing us.
I guess
See if
so.
we could
he said we couldn't do houses. I was just being following the instructions.
Yeah, that's really.
So if I pulled $1 million out of my wallet, would you guys be surprised?
See, you brought us another
I would be.
I would be surprised if anybody did that.
Yeah, if you did that, you'd have big pockets.
Okay.
It's a check. It's a credit card, right?
No, actually, I asked someone. I typically ask people for $1 million. Someone actually gave me one.
Take that to the bank, yeah.
We'll put Dwayne down as
So
the
Dwayne's
how
on
for
the-
number
Dwayne's
one.
probably on the bill.
Right.
Who did they put on the bill? That's what I want to know. Who's on it?
Looks
Yeah.
good. I would buy it.
Jefferson.
Jefferson.
He's
I don't think that
single-handedly
works.
funding the regional STEM hubs.
Yeah. You know, people go to jail for things like this, you know?
I didn't print it.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't try to spend it yet.
That's pretty good.
What does it say on the back?
So do we have 4?
Yeah, we've got 4.
The $1 million question, will you go to heaven when you die?
And some of these others kind of nest into some of these, but I think we got 4 basic ones.
Something to work with. Isn't that great?
But at the end of the day, you gotta distill this stuff.
I had a friend who would always say, whenever there was something expensive, he'd be like, it's $1.8 million. I don't care what it is, it's $1.8 million. It's what it costs, everything's $1.8 million. And it takes 6 months. Wow, that's really, wow.
We were doing some renovation in a loft one time. It didn't matter what thing we needed to do. It was $1,200. Like, we need to fix about $1,200. Plumbing, $1,200.
Yep, so that was Roger.
It's called critical mass. They won't do anything for less than $1,200. So
It wasn't even. It just was weird. It didn't matter whether we did it ourselves or we hired it out.
We had a house like that. We paid $10,000 every time.
Yeah, really, yeah.
Ours,
We got rid of the house.
we were doing it on the slide. You know, again, it was the.
That's right.
It wasn't all.
I got my square for me, and then email it to me. Just like scan it in. I'm sorry, this was getting worn. Can you give me the fresh one? Yeah, that's right. The very crisp one. That's awesome. I'm surprised you haven't actually pulled it out and spend it. Because it looks like there's real money on it. Oh, I'm sorry, I gave you $1 million. You probably have my bad.
Can you break it?
might not have that. You break $1 million. Go in to buy a candy bar and say, "Oh, I got some money."
It's a quarter if I need to do laundry.
Education systems, you might end up with somebody that tries to do that. They're typing 1000000. How many zeros are changed? 998.
That sets up an alarm in the back when they come to get me, right? It's like this person trying to pass a.
That's right. That is kind of counterfeiting, isn't it?
Oh yeah, there's the law. You're trying to pass phony money.
Counterfeit really is just completely ludicrous money.
Well, if
I
you're,
give you Monopoly now.
well, my intent is not intending to pass it.
And where are you going with this?
And there are probably very detailed, like postage, there are very detailed regulations about what you're allowed to do as fake postage.
Right.
It has to be smaller than 75% or larger than 150% of the actual stamp size. I mean, it's craziness. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, it's like, that gets into the, perhaps we're getting a little too specific here.
Yeah, wow. That's job security for somebody right there.
Did we catch your thought about, I know,
the broadband.
the broadband, about the infrastructure piece that we allowed? Did you write it down? Jim didn't take it, but she said it was like, don't forget. And I'm like, no,
to make sure they did. Yeah.
I did. I wrote it down, and it's one of those things that is part of a broader conversation.
Okay. So it's on him. We told you it's on you. No, it didn't want to die.
Well, it does. Well, it's one of the means of actually the hubs interconnecting. Right. So,
It's so true. There's so much great stuff going on out there, and it is so much of what we run into. It's just connecting the dots.
No one's job to do that.
Constantly.
Actually, no one's job.
Constantly. And it's sort of like you need a big magnet to turn it on and start pulling everybody in. Because, I mean, it doesn't, barely a day goes by that it's like, oh, you don't know about this, do you?
You're like, oh wow.
Here's another thing you need to know about this so that we can get more.
I mean, it's exciting in one way that there's so many cool things happening. And we really are a state that we don't know about it.
Give me $1 million.
But then again, it's like, oh my gosh, there's this cool thing happening.
And we wouldn't have had to do our half-assed version of it.
Yeah, trial by fire.
How do we get more
I've worked with Big Borrow and Steel.
No one actually recognizes
Lots of good stuff.
So part of it is
Yes, no.
Some of them are like,
I wish that was my only position.
because we say
I'm supposed to be the communication person. So I don't get that. We should have someone every day. And what you do, well, that's the it's done.
You're right.
Instead.
Well, I'm curious to see how our group organization is compared to theirs. I'm thinking that.
I read the article different. But that's not. I got another thing. Like, what have you got? What's making you guys sad? The actual getting of people together. And it's, all digital.
It's getting warm in here. It's like,
The group brought together for this.
That's what I thought you were. Well, but here's the thing.
Same group, all your meeting here, we're gonna talk to
We have
and they get used to it and they engage
we don't have a
and
strategy
excited,
that actually allows us to
but we don't
monetize
take
it.
time for it.
Okay, so
It's more like, oh my God, that's a great idea.
is that one of the Math 95 discussions that are coming out next week? Yeah, we've been having some side conversations that we do
so you can show
about how to address it. Because we've got multiple things going on. And it's all, okay, let's put all of these together because they all do fit. We just have to make sure that we don't
coming out of those
step in each other's
Right.
toes or missing them.
We're piloting like a Math 98
Okay, but
kind of
instead of
class
having the content, now I
in a
can bring
few of the
industry in
community
there.
colleges, which is like a
We're gonna bring
quantitative
dollars.
literacy, so it's non-STEM.
Okay, great. Because we were just having a discussion last week, last Friday, about how do we look at that, not necessarily replacing that, but some flavor of it that fits more with different, that's not directly related to what I'm going to go into, math 11 sequence and then 250. I'm not going into a science or engineering background necessarily, so I need really more focus on things like statistics, and I mean that's the traditional way. But there are other things that you could be doing with,
Right, so if he's gonna go to
whatever,
John's office or start, you know, looking at it and say, okay,
And this is a Math 98 is like it's the data that pays for the statistics line instead of trying to force everybody through the algebra model. This is more of, so you come in, you don't have any, you go into Math 98, I was a humanities major. So you go into that, you take Math 98, you learn your quantitative literacy, pre-stats, everything. You go to Math 105, and then you take your stats class, and you transfer, and you're done. You've got 2 math classes.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know,
You're done.
I can't tell you how many PhDs in sociology and stuff like that go, hated math, hated math, hated math. All of a sudden, oh, I need to do this for my dissertation. I can figure out how to do math now. I know lots of people like
I
that.
swore off the doctorate because I was afraid of statistics. Because when I was in high school, I had a math teacher that went, my pearls can't learn math. And so I was like, okay, so I was one of those hate math, STEM, la la la, doesn't like this kind of thing. But then you look at it and it's so much more.
Once you have a context, it's so much better.
Yeah, I can't do science. They don't think they can do it.
I just smile and nod.
But you have a contact.
Absolutely. It is. And it's so that pre-stats, that quantitative literacy kind of thing. It's that joke. There's a in California. So for her class, everybody I do. And she gives them a no. There's nutrition levels. Tell me which one is better for kids. Which one's more nutritious? So they go through do other things. Then they talk about which ones they picked and why. Well, this is the statistical work that they just did. Instead of
Here's the problem.
Yeah. Today we're learning, statistical regression. Everybody goes,
Hey.
But I've done that with all kinds of my brother was a Spanish teacher.
How's it going? So you're going to do a chemical meeting tomorrow, huh?
I am.
You're a boss. You just retired. No, you're a med researcher.
I was. I just changed companies, actually. I am. My husband started a company called Black Canyon Woodworks. Yeah. So we had a couple years.
Interesting. Making furniture and stuff like that?
Dad, and he also does customized cutting boards that realtors give away.
Yeah, with names and stuff like that.
Yeah, their logos.
So you're an entrepreneur now, huh?
I think that's
How's it going?
It's fun.
So you have more time to stay at home and do things
It's
too.
a lot less time on your plate.
Are you the business guy? Are you the business person? He's the worker, huh?
Yeah, he does all the
You have more
operations.
productivity here.
Exactly. Well, it's funny because I work on our financial projections and nothing with targets.
Yeah, that's what I say. Yeah, that's what I say. Here's the production you need to have. It's a hockey stick, right? Now, if we keep doing this and we keep growing.
Yeah, here's where we got to, have another shot.
Yeah,
So let's
that's
get here.
Here's my labor costs, and here's my overhead, here's my material costs.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to be an entrepreneur. It's kind of scary, probably.
Kind of is, although really what it's been for the last 3 years is build a new arm of the business.
Yeah.
So I've had to be marketing and I had to be.
Equity funds to help you, right? Or you have funding. I mean, now you are the business.
That's right.
You have no other source of revenue.
No, now I really got to fall back on that.
Right? Yeah, we got 4 that we're going to talk about. 2 from each table, I think.
Yeah, okay. So I think we'll just, and I want to circle up with, if you guys have somebody or a couple of people that I can actually meet with to do?
Me and Lisa, probably.
Okay. Maybe we can do that right
I
after.
tried this, you noticed.
You
gotta do that. You gotta be a little more.
Gotta go down to Oregon State. We have a trustee meeting right down in Newport at the Hatfield Green Center. Yeah, so that's our trustee meeting this week, so it's becoming
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start this process.
You're probably thinking of Rod, our CEO.
Yeah, Rod. Yeah, Yeah.
He's still there.
She's still there. Okay. Retiring.
Well, I don't think he'll ever.
He said it's my last day tomorrow, and I'm retiring. And
I heard a rumor that he might be taking a position somewhere related to the company, no longer day-to-day. But I don't know, he wasn't too pleased when I chose to leave. But I mean, he's leaving too, so
that's right. Life and time.
life's too short to just.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we need your attention so we can get through this. So the idea right now is we'll go through each table. We'll try to report out as best we can what the table concluded, with the risk of maybe getting it slightly wrong, but we'll just do that. And you can hear it. Maybe we'll go through each 3 tables. We'll maybe we'll do that. Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what our table concluded. So when we went through this all, we had a great conversation. We decided that there really wasn't a K through 12 or a post-secondary. They really kind of meshed together. And there was a lot of hows here, so we tried to really get it to the what's without picking the hows. And we tried to make it at a high level so they'd be policy statements, not real particular. So we came up with 4, and we actually had pretty good consensus on it. If you start on the first page, there was general agreement on the first 2 under the STEM infrastructure, but we wanted to change those to get away from the how, but more to the what. And so we took off, so the first one would read, you get rid of all of the funding, you just say increase access to evidence-based outcomes, go through that whole thing, and ensure a continuum of funding to make that happen. So not assume that it's the STEM investment fund, and we can get that as the how to do it, but really the what is we need to do this, and that's important. Same with number 2. It was really the what. We didn't want to pick the regional hubs as the reason to do this. So it's a support for a statewide network to catalyze economic workforce and blah blah blah. And then at the end we'd add infrastructure to that, and then drop the last sentence. So really the idea is we need this network to do this, and not specifically point out the STEM hubs as that's one how. There may be other hows on how to do that, and we can talk about the various pluses and minuses, and there may be too many of these things going on, but the fact is we need to have this network because it's a way to push out this idea. So again, the concept good, turn it into a what, and not pick the winners here, not say how many we need, but just say it's important to have a statewide network to do those things. The third big idea, which I think there was really big consensus on, was around this idea of awareness. So if you go to number 7, we took that and broadened it. It's for the entire learning continuum. So it reads something like this: foster early career awareness and career-related successful learning experiences in STEM across the learning continuum, and continue to build on those experiences with role models, mentorship, internships, apprenticeships, and career connections. So not try to pick a age category, but this whole idea of and this should also, I didn't say it should apply to both students and teachers and industry. So it's really that whole partnership across the continuum that we all need to work together, students, educators, and industry, to foster this career awareness. So that's that whole idea that we need to work collectively as a community across the learning continuum to build this relationship and awareness. So that was really, in fact, that was probably our one that we totally coalesced on. I may not get the words precisely right, but it was that concept. And the last one was, there's a lot of conversation around motivation and how we motivate people and motivate systems to work. So we came up with one, a high level says, define potential motivational structures, systems, and incentives for employers, educators, and students to achieve the desired STEM outcomes. So high policy level, not picking the specific individual categories. There's lots of hows under that, like, badging, yeah, a bunch of things that we could do. We scholarships, education, educator training, learning, things like that. So those were the 4 we came up with, and many of the things here look like hows that could nest under those 4 whats. And that's kind of what we concluded. So I leave it to the table. Did I miss anything, or did I get it about right?
Good job.
Well done.
Okay. Okay. And there was universal, I think there was general support. Those are the four big ideas. A lot of the other things would nest under that and would fit under there pretty easily, and could be kind of examples of how you might do those things. So anyway, that's what we did. We had great team effort, and Lisa was really good motivating us. And Dwayne kept us on task, so I'm gonna give Dwayne credit. He'd say, "Let's go on the." Dwayne would say, "Let's work on the list. We got it," and then he'd go off on a tangent.
But he did keep coming back to get back to the list. So.
And then he showed us the $1 million bill, and
that was it. Yeah. Okay, so we're done.
We took a different approach. We're not very good at following instructions over here. And we started looking at all the 12 different pieces, and we said, what is the context by which we are actually making this decision? And the context has to be relative to the goals. And the goals then were defined, they have been legislatively defined, and they were at the beginning, at the top of the page. And we said, are these really the goals? Are these really the aspirational goals of which we really are seeking to accomplish? And we struggled with that, and we understand that why they are defined within a piece of legislation. Are these truly what our goals are from the industry perspective, from the education perspective? So we struggled with that. And we recognized that and had a long discussion about what was the vision. Because we had an earlier discussion about the vision, and we really, in our second session as a council, and we really, as a team, really went back to that greater vision of what does it mean to really prepare the talent for an innovation-based economy? And how do we inspire these kids? And wasn't that really what we wanted to do? And how everything had to align then against that larger vision. Because that had to be, as we talked about before, we needed that North Star. Because if not, we felt like we were floundering by looking at these different pieces and trying to pick winners and losers here. And then so after we got through that discussion, we then began to look at this and started going through them sequentially and looked at the strengths of all of them, and it was, again, very hard to prioritize. So as our time was running out, we began to have to, we recognized we had to scramble because we needed to kind of report out something more than while we had a nice discussion. And so we thought, well, was there a different way for us to begin to think about all of these 12 pieces of the puzzle as it relates to that vision? And we began to thought, what could we start to put buckets in here? Could we define 3 buckets and force ourselves to then take each of these into those 3 major buckets? And would that help us think about this strategically? Because again, we don't want to think about this tactically, because that's not our job. Our job is to think about it strategically. So we began to say, what could those 3 buckets be that all of these tactics could actually fit into? And we began to realize, well, a group of them have to do with funding. How do we actually financially support the investment? So we defined that as one bucket. We then look at, well, another important one was, how do we develop the capacity? So development was another bucket that we said, okay, so that's a piece that we've got to understand. And the third one was about the network. How do we build infrastructures, these networks that create the learning communities that allow us to be agile and quickly creating these solutions? So once we did that, we said, okay, if we have those 3 buckets, could we, now we have about 2 minutes left before the end of our session, could we take all of those 12 ideas and actually quickly toss them into one of those buckets? And so we actually found that each one of those 12 fit into one of those buckets. We then said, okay, now that we've got them all in those buckets, what are the ones, how do we begin to allow a filtering within those buckets to allow us to be able to identify which are the ones. And one of the ones that came up on the funding was the critical piece was about the whole issue about the CTE funding formula. And that funding formula was one that was an issue that had to be out there. But we recognized that there were other elements of funding that needed to be put in place. At that time, we were running out of time. But I think that we wanted to look at this, we wanted to create a strategic framework. And again, just to get us going down this path of recognizing what was that vision, what was a big, hairy, audacious goal along that, which I think we've got that defined. But then how do we put each of these pieces within a strategic context Because at the end of the day, we recognized that we weren't going to be successful unless we created stories and told stories. And that everything that we do had to be about creating and telling stories. Because if not, then we couldn't go back to the legislature and say, these are the stories that are coming out of these initiatives. These are the stories about funding. These are the stories about professional development. These are the stories about building network. Because if we did that, we felt that there would be a much more powerful story to tell, not only here in Salem, but throughout the whole state.
So you guys have to stay after school to finish your assignment?
Right, and the measurable result was.
You needed Dwayne.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, we did. I know.
That was good. Very good.
Note that Dwayne and Thompson are in different groups.
So you want to do the third group? Just
Well, we joked about this. We were down back here at the kids' table. Didn't get a table. Joe had, I think, a couple of excellent thoughts, and that was to look at this both in terms of investment as well as policy. And we talked about that a little bit. But we really dove in and started thinking about implementation, and implementation in the sense of being successful early on so that would then drive, continued funding. So I'd say I was a strong advocate for things being wrapped around the STEM hubs as opposed to taking out the word regional STEM hub, as Jim mentioned. I was looking at it more of how do we drive some of these things through mechanization. And we can't do it at a state level. It's real difficult to do it at a district level, but if we can divide it into regional hubs, that could be pretty successful. So we talked about that a little bit. I think we had a couple of items that we felt were not on the list that we'd like to add. I hate to go from 13 to 15. We did take a couple away, but one was with regards to math. We recognize that kids are getting into college, and one of the highest failed freshman classes is Math 101. So there was an item in here where it talks about more balanced focus on elementary schools that include increased time on science. We maybe need to work at something that talks about math. So that kids are prepared when they get to college to take on those classes. The other item that we felt was missing was dual credit. There was nothing in here about accelerated learning in the post-secondary world at all. And that, we think, is a critical ramp to get kids going from high school into college and achieving that 2-year degree or 4-year degree or some post-secondary education. I don't know. Team, what else do we have? Is that a quick summary? The alternative routes to certification was one that I think we sort of started around a little bit and saying that would be a difficult one to put in place early on. Maybe that's something to look at much further out in time.
And might have low impact.
And low impact, yeah. Right. And then with regards to out-of-school learning and such, we talked about regionalized, place-based. Again, tying back to the STEM hubs, there could be things that are specific to the Oregon coast and marine science and such that may not be as important to the kids in the high desert or the Willamette Valley and food science and what have you, precision agriculture. So there's a lot of neat things that we thought we could mechanize through the STEM hubs and look at things as successes.
So thoughts on what you've heard across the groups? I mean, each group approached it very differently. So I'm sweating.
Mark, you got to solve this problem.
and I must say that, just hearing the way that you approach them, taking the idea of the what and the why and elevating is critical to be writing the context. I think ultimately what we have to do is move to strategic recommendations that are, actionable and have enough meat for people to see that it's not just, broad, fluff in there. So taking that, marrying it in with, from a very much an implementation mindset and then sort of the morass in between. It is valuable to look at it through
those three perspectives. So comments that people have from what you've heard from the other groups, or challenging each other. I mean, we've got about 10 minutes to do this, and then I'd like to invite public comment, and then we'll circle back at a future meeting, probably online. Okay.
I have nothing, no.
Nothing to say.
You're rare, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Well, we can say. Well, I actually like the way this ended up breaking down, because we actually were looking at some strategic things we need that we need to do. But the conversation and those things are hard to do without the story that you folks were talking about. So there's an ongoing dialogue around what this is, how it works, that I think that we as a group and we as a community have to participate in. And that makes the policy work possible, that work makes the strategic work that we're talking about possible, which allow the implementation that they're talking about to happen. So it's almost like it presents a frame, 3 different swim lanes, so to speak, of activities that we can be working in and around this, so that when we're talking about the story, we're setting the stage for the policy that will actually allow those things to show up in a way people will recognize. When we actually put the policies in place, that sets the structure for the tactical work to happen. So it means that the policies we create are not ones that are so constricting that it says you must have 14 different resource hubs that are going to be around the state, because some people will see that and say, well, that's what the answer is, let's go do that, as opposed to stepping back and saying, well, this is really about the aspiration of those hubs, it's really about building community and connections. So I think that part of our thinking needs to be around letting the practitioners actually do the work that needs to be done how they see it being done, and not have us on the council try to become experts in that area, because we will fail miserably there. So I think this was great, and I think it actually turned out the way it should.
I just want to add something about the practitioner, which goes back to the third group. What I heard was, hey, let's focus on science rather than math. I understood that well?
No, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Oh.
The issue was that one of the recommendations happened to be number 9, talked about increasing time on science at the elementary level, and with kids getting into college not being prepared with strong enough math skills, we felt it would be a 9A or 9B, as the case may be, which would be something that addresses a focus on math because of that lacking.
But just adding, I really think, and we had some discussion, our math teachers are failing our kids. That's just, we need to get our practitioners, all the math teachers in Oregon, they need to come together and find some way. They're the practitioner. How do we get them to teach our kids effective math? I mean, we keep hammering and hammering and hammering at this math thing, and we are failing and failing. Our kids are not going into math because it's boring, it's unattractive, it's just, we need to do something about that. And I thought you had said that, and I was just jumping out of my chair, but...
So you're agreeing?
I agree. I kind of agree. I rather emphasize numbers rather than math, because it's getting our kids so confused. They're not going into math. They hate it.
Can I just add a context, since that was what my comment started? This is not to increase time on math, time on science, but just to recognize it really was a comment that followed an observation that we haven't necessarily identified all of the pinch points in sort of supply of our students as they prepare for community college or for university. So if more than half, maybe 2/3 of our students are arriving as first-year college students unprepared to start a science program, mainly because of math lack of preparation, then the rest does. We've got to address that, and I don't think the answer is more time on math, but there's got to be something throughout the system that makes math valuable. And they don't need to have calculus perhaps, but they have to be fluent in algebra when they start college.
If I had, they mentioned as a practitioner, I was talking about one of these recent hire we had. I think that our kids are changing. I think the way they look at things are a lot different than the way it was time to get a job.
Yeah.
It's not about how much bucks they make necessarily. It's the quality of life they're looking at. You know, whether what they're doing is mattering to the society or to their community. And that's something that, to me, that's what comes out of these different programs, the transformation that you were talking about in our group, you know, what really motivates them and inspires them. And then they continue on, yeah, I want to do this, I want to get to this point in my life. So I think there's a real shift in this generation.
I agree and I disagree, but we don't need, in the sense that every generation says that about previous generations. No, I mean, yes, there's certainly nuances to it. They're very, very, very different. But ultimately, I think people are people and they get motivated by the same things. Well, not necessarily, but I just, yeah. We can go into a whole, that's a different conversation.
At some point, dollars do have a lot to do with quality of life.
Yep.
And not to speak for the table totally, but there was a lot of conversation around the motivational aspects of STEM. That it's not attractive and that we haven't created the Michael Jordans of the STEM fields, you know, and kids don't see it as relevant, and that's why we talked about the importance of industry and of educators and everyone creating that motivation so kids are interested, because that's what ultimately excites them. And if they're not excited, they're not motivated, they're not interested, you know, and then they check out. And
But I think I started that conversation just by talking about how do we create a farm team mentality for STEM. You know, similar, when do you identify athletic prowess? You identify it very early, and it isn't just up to schools to develop that. You have tons of parents, community, businesses that are all engaged in that. And so how do we develop that farm team mentality moving forward?
Well, and let's face it, one of the biggest barriers right now to STEM is its perception problem. It is a huge perception problem. It's largely seen as for those who are talented and gifted, tends to be biased towards males, tends to be biased towards reasonably affluent white males. I mean, that's a really very strong reality that exists within our system right now. If we're going to actually encourage more people to go into STEM fields and put up with some really challenging learning environments that are less than engaging and less than sort of accessible to them, then they have to have a very strong motivation as to why. Why is it relevant? Why is it exciting? What is the bottom line for me? How does it fit with my contributions to the greater society? And if we're not coupling our systems changes that we're talking about with actually a public relations campaign to draw people in and to change perceptions around STEM, I don't think we're going to get there. So I think that's not necessarily our job as a STEM council per se within the mandate or within what's legislated, but we should be working with our industries and with our economic development to put out campaigns and change that perception and make it more accessible to a greater number of individuals.
I think the harsh realities of the economy since the recession, though, is pounding that message in pretty quickly, because the folks that are getting hired quickly have these skills. People that are languishing or don't.
those who hear that message and feel that they
Feel
can
that.
actually have choice within it. And there is a huge portion of our population who does not feel that those options exist for them. In fact, they're told quite explicitly that they're not.
Which is always interesting because what truly is STEM at certain levels of job is pretty basic stuff. Right? And we're not talking about calculus to work on my production floor. You're talking about being able to read a ruler. So, which is STEM. So, and so, yeah. But it's a massive barrier for half the people who walk through my doors for a job.
The perception problem that I challenge you on is that I think there are a good number of kids going into universities that are not getting out of the university. And I think we could make a huge change and impact immediately if we could get those kids to continue perseverance and get them to focus on. It's not 40% of our kids that need to have a bachelor's degree, it's 40% of our kids that need to have a bachelor's degree in STEM.
Yeah, there's arguments that if we increased our yield rate with the existing pipeline,
we would be done.
We would be fine.
Right? So if we want to focus, that's the focus.
For short term, yeah. I think for the just the work phase for
Let's be successful. That's our goal. And with success, we'll breed further success.
And just to be clear on that, that's current population. The equity lens is not there, though. We've got a significant issue there. You may harvest the right numbers, but you're not going to get the equity side of this, which is
there's
woefully
those greater
lacking.
issues that we're talking about, the other corners of the spider web, right? But to solve, like you say, to solve the immediate short-term problem that was sold to the legislature, it is pretty much in the pipeline. We're scrapping way too much.
On metrics, we've got some data work going on right now, which I really, when we get it, we'll give them to you immediately. We're trying to get much more refined on what certificates we're producing, so that one of the things I hope for this upcoming budget, you'll be able to say we need this many more specific, CTEs, whatever the type, engineers, and we'll try to get that. For the heck, we're getting this and get it to you all, because that'll help focus your investments.
And Karina, did you have some comments that you wanted to make?
Was it public comment time?
Well, we're in a sort of an open public
So
share.
let's make this an official public comment. Just say your name, and we'll do that, and then let's move on because we have to wrap this up. So, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's why I'm here. Thank you. I'm Karina Lee. I am the executive director of the Salem Kaiser Education Foundation. And a little bit more context, I'm also a former Salem Kaiser School Board member. I'm also very involved in the creation of the new Mountain West Career Technical Regional High School to be built here in the Salem Kaiser area. I'm very proud that I've been on partnership with Joe and a group of other women, including Deb Mom-Hill, Beth Unverzat, Lita Colligan, in bringing an Oregon chapter of the National Girls Collaborative Project to Oregon. We've received our funding, we've received our thing. So regarding the equity lens of bringing girls and underserved populations into this industry. My main point in being here is one, to thank you that one of the items on your recommendations is the out-of-school or expanded learning opportunities time. Salem Kaiser Education Foundation is the greatest provider of expanded learning opportunities in Salem Kaiser. We have schools, 26 schools out of our 45, we are in their programs. And being the Education Foundation, we're unique as an education foundation in Oregon because we do direct program delivery. We are actually the fiscal agent for our 21st Century Community Grant. That makes us much more nimble, and our money can go a lot further. But being the Education Foundation and being a former school board member, we don't apologize one iota for being relentless on academic integration. Our staff, our after-school staff, goes to Common Core Standard training. And thank you to John, we are at the table, a contributing member of the Salem Kaiser STEM Implementation Task Force. And we are able to take some of that real scariness out of a teacher that really wants to try Lego robotics or Mouse Squad or Tinker Space as a precursor to design and engineering. Or in our region, we're really looking at our regional solutions in agriculture and agribusiness. We have the first aquaponics-based, school-based aquaponics greenhouse and an after-school program. We're allowed to take that scariness out of the teacher that really wants to go down this path, but damn it, they're not going to do it if they've got an assessment over their back right that second. They can experiment with it. They themselves can be the designers and the engineers. So, and we right now are being very deliberate in arranging our after-school programs in our CTE strands. So why would you give up your one precious elective to go into engineering and design or automotive if you don't even know what the heck that looks like? So given the opportunity, the permission to experiment and still bring in our teachers in that professional development, and we are requiring that professional development. We are also looking very seriously at Oregon Ask with Oregon and California and teaming up on the digital badges. You all have talked about the electronic achievement records. We're looking at the MacArthur Foundation's work on digital badges, which I think also helps that out-of-school programming, the nonprofits that are relentlessly integrating your work in academics, I think is essential. And boy, you want to hear stories. I can tell you stories. And you want to hear a story about how after school the kids come, they show up because they get the meal, and then they show up because they're not going to go home and sit alone by the time. That's how we had a third grader become invested in Lego robotics, because it happened to be in after school. And he ended up having the winning codes to win the statewide. Greg was there. And we did a lot of research because all of a sudden he didn't show up, he didn't show up, he didn't show up. Where was he? Where was he? He wasn't coming up 2 weeks before the statewide tournament, 2 weeks before the regional tournament. It wasn't until then we learned he was homeless. And he was living in the back of a car. And he ran into the tournament. And he literally had a code written on the back of a McDonald's hamburger wrapper. And his students and his teammates said, "You bet, let's try it." They won the tournament, and that trophy spent its first night in the back of a car, because that's where he was living. Thank you for bringing up, we have to tell stories, because your work, as hard and as complicated as this is, that's the story that makes your farm team. There's your farm team, and I could tell you a farm team story about design and engineering and agriculture with a little boy on an after-school garden program. I could tell you about the letters. So after school integrated with what you're doing is absolutely essential, and I thank you. Thank you for the hard work you're doing, and thank you for allowing the opportunity for the public comment. And you let us know when you need the cheerleaders, because I'll deliver raving fans.
Thank you very much. Nice stories, nice stories. Thank you for what you do. Thank you. Any other public comments? It's be hard to
How do
follow
you
that
follow
one.
that?
Yeah, I was gonna say. But go ahead, give it a try.
Knock yourself out.
My name is Peter Steinmetz. I'm from Portland Community College. I'm Dean of Science and Engineering. And I just have one observation and a request. I understand that many times the word degree in this, as it's been drafted, has been used intentionally without certificate. But many people, when they see degree without certificate, will assume that it's intentional. So if it's intentional, that's fantastic. I know there's a whole context behind the use of these two words. But in many cases, I would suggest that at least that be considered whenever you write degree, 2-year degree, post-secondary degree, whatever your phrase is. Consider adding certificate, because for many students, that's their stopping point temporarily, and we'd like them to be able to come back and finish that degree after they've made a milestone with the certificate.
Thank you. Is credential an inclusive enough word to include both industry-driven credentials, degrees, and certificates?
Yes.
Inclusive enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay. Well, thank you all. This was a great day. It's probably one of the best sessions we've had. We rolled up our sleeves. It got a little messy. We've got different points of view. I thought Dwayne did a good job bringing it together and how we can kind of mesh these two ideas. Mark now has an assignment, as he always does, to try to figure out how to bring this together. We do appreciate your input. This advice is very important to us, and we do appreciate it. And I think we learn a lot every time we have these interactions, and I think we're all committed to getting the same results. So thanks so much. You'll see more of this as we go down the road. We will probably engage you again as we go forward and get your feedback on what we do here. And Mark, I'll leave it up to you to figure out the process to do that.
Yeah, thanks.
Don't get so excited.
100,000 foot
I'll try to get something out to you within the next couple of weeks. Our next formal STEM meeting is on June 17th. We have a presentation to the OEID on June 12th. We need to have sort of finalized recommendations to, again, by July 24th, to the outcomes and investments. We're going to have to do some hard work balancing the philosophical with the practical and the pragmatic, and really, I think having that North Star and circling back to grounding in that vision is absolutely essential to drive a statewide strategic plan in STEM, which unfortunately we don't have the luxury of time to manage, and the danger is that we don't, that we miss the mark. As I said to this table, I'm quite confident, having spoken to every one of the council members and the vast majority of the other individuals in this room, I am very confident that that North Star is very similar to us. How it manifests itself in the pragmatics and the day-to-day looks a little different depending on which chair you're sitting in and what your role is in the room. But I think we want all of the same things for our communities and for our kids, and we'll massage these to know that there's going to be some incremental and transformative work, and that this is a first step to lay some of the foundations toward that goal. So thank you all for the input. I really appreciate it, and please do not hesitate to contact me, and if you have time, additional time, and would like to help iterate in the next 2 weeks, let me know, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Meetings.